Good evening. We'll call this meeting of the Johnson City Board of Commissioners for Thursday, August 16th, 2018 to order. If you will rise for the invocation by Dr. Vic Young, pastor of the Fountain of Life Bible Church, and then remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Let us pray. Father, in the name of Jesus, we come into your holy presence. We know, Father, that your word tells us if any man lacks wisdom, let him ask of God who giveth liberally. And Father, we just pray that indeed wisdom be showered upon these meetings tonight. We pray, Father God, your blessings upon our city. And we also pray your blessings and guidance upon our country. Father, we ask that indeed everything we say and do, that we will seek the righteousness of a nation. Guide us in all things for your glory. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Did I get you that?
It's kind of nice to know that we have some civic pride in the world.
That sounded great. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Before we get started, I know most of you are here for the United Way Proclamation, is that right? Or traffic court. Yeah. No, we know why most of you are here tonight. There were some concerns that you wouldn't be heard. You'll be heard, I promise you. The order in which things are presented to the commission are presented that way for a reason. And we'll explain that a little further as we get closer to it. But I assure you, everybody will have an opportunity to be heard. If you want to be heard, we will have we'll have good discussion on it. And I don't know, we may have a solution. Who knows? So, Mr. Peterson?
First order of business is consideration of the minutes of your meeting held Thursday, August the 8th.
Any comments, edits, corrections, or a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Okay, a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Fowler? Commissioner Van Broeckle?
Yes.
Sorry. Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Temita?
Yes.
Next order of business is presentation of a proclamation for the United Way of Washington County to kick off the local campaign. We could ask United Way representatives to come up, please.
There's three of you. I thought there was
They're all here.
That's right. We are united. Well, this is our annual proclamation, and I believe we're also waiving our sign ordinance, which becomes very evident right after election time when they start popping up in the right of way and start ending up in sign jail. So your signs will not be subject to sign jail after tonight, because and there's only, to my knowledge, you're one of only two we do this for, right? ETSU.
ETSU.
So, to kick off your campaign, whereas the United Way of Washington County, Tennessee fights for the health, education, and financial stability of every person in our community, and whereas 36,494 Johnson City residents received assistance from or took part in programs supported by United Way of Washington County, Tennessee in 2017, and whereas the United Way of Washington County, Tennessee provides more than $1.7 million of assistance in our area each year, and whereas the United Way of Washington County, Tennessee officially begins its annual fundraising campaign, Changing Lives and Making a Difference in Our Community, at a kickoff event on August 23rd, 2018. Now therefore, I, David Temita, Mayor of the City of Johnson City, Tennessee, do hereby proclaim August 23rd, 2018, United Way of Washington County, Tennessee Local Kickoff Day, and urge residents to participate in the fundraising campaign in support of United Way and its partners and programs, thereby making ours a more caring and compassionate community where we all give, advocate, volunteer, and live united. There you are.
Kristen's doing a great job.
Maybe you'd like to
Oh, yes.
Introduce yourself.
Yes.
I don't think you've been in front of the commission before. Were you here last year? Never
Earlier
mind.
this year, I guess.
Her first day at work.
First day of work, literally.
right.
My name is Kristen Jennings. I'm the president and CEO for United Way of Washington County, Tennessee. And this is Jennifer Owen with First Tennessee Bank, and she is our vice campaign chair for this year. We just want to say thank you guys so much for your support. I know David mentioned some numbers. Almost 37,000 Johnson City residents received assistance from us last year. That's 55% of the population of Johnson City, not mentioning all of the people in Jonesboro, Washington County, and the surrounding areas. So please, this year, as you see the United Way signs, please give, support us, volunteer. We have a lot of new initiatives going on, and we just thank you guys for helping us change lives and make a difference in our community.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, your next order of business is consideration of a temporary occasion license for the Blue Plum organization to sell beer at Founders After 5 on September the 14th. The appropriate reviews have been made, finding no disqualifying factors. Recommendation is for approval.
Very good. Are you the applicant?
I am.
All right. Would you state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Jason Onks, address 7 Sleepy Hollow Lane, Johnson City, Tennessee.
Very good. Jason, have you read the rules and regulations regarding the sale of beer in the city of Johnson City?
Yes.
Do you agree to abide by those rules?
Yes.
Do you have any questions for
No.
us? Do we have any questions for the applicant?
Move approval.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Temita?
Yes. I think you got one more.
Oh, yeah.
The
Yeah, no go.
next is consideration of a temporary occasion license for the Blue Plum organization to sell beer on Friday, September the 28th at a Founders After 5 event. Again, the appropriate reviews have been made, finding no disqualifying factors. The recommendation is for approval.
For those of us with short-term memory problems, please state your name and address for the record, please.
Jason Onks, 7 Sleepy Hollow Lane, Johnson City, Tennessee.
And have you read the rules and regulations regarding sale of beer in the city of Johnson City?
Yes.
Do you agree to abide by those rules?
Yes.
Do you have any questions for us?
No.
Move approval.
Second. Motion and second. Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Temita?
Yes. And if you'd like to plug your event?
Yes,
Please do.
we're excited about this. This is a fundraiser for us to be able to sell the beer. These funds actually go and help us with the Christmas parade, which this commission approved very shortly. So we're already in the planning process for that. We hope that folks might come out, see the band that'll be there, and have a good time and build some community while you're there.
Very good. Good luck.
Thank you.
Next order of business is consider a temporary occasion license for the Johnson City Brewing Company to sell beer at the Operation Warm Coats for Kids event to be held on Saturday, September the 29th. The appropriate reviews have been made, finding no disqualifying factors. The recommendation is for approval.
Very good. Is the applicant here tonight? No. I think we know who the applicant
Oh, it's
is.
Kat.
Yes.
I think we told
And
her
I was in
she didn't have
attendance
to-
last year, and I can vouch for rules being followed. So if,
On you, Mayor.
pardon?
It's on you, Mayor.
It's-
I'll make the motion.
This is, oh yeah, I'll still be around.
Move
Yeah.
approval.
So
Yeah.
moved.
Got a motion and a second. Yeah, I'm on record, so. Kat, don't let me down. Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Temita?
Yes.
Next order of business is consider a temporary occasion license for Shakespeare in Johnson City to sell beer at the Much Ado About Nothing event to be held on September 1st and 2nd and September 8th and 9th. This is a temporary occasion license, and the appropriate reviews have been made, finding no disqualifying factors. We would recommend your approval for this event at Founders Park.
Very good. I believe the applicant's here, if she can get out of the, yeah.
The seats don't get any bigger.
Now, I think we know you, but don't you have a different name?
Not yet.
Or, so okay. never
I
mind.
will,
Very
but
good.
no, not yet.
All right.
It's still Linnea Hunter, 435 West Poplar Street.
All right. And have you read the rules and regulations regarding the sale of beer in the city of Johnson City?
I have?
All right. Do you agree to abide by those rules?
Yes.
Do you have any questions for us?
No.
Okay. Do I have any questions for the applicant?
Move approval. Second.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Tuita?
Yes.
Right.
Would you like to tell us about your event?
Sure. Shakespeare in Johnson City is, we've been around since 2015. Last year, we received our official 501c3 nonprofit status, so we're very pleased with that. We're just a group of volunteers and Shakespeare lovers who think that Shakespeare is way more accessible and relevant. And so this production is going to be Much Ado About Nothing, September 1st and 2nd, 8th and 9th, and we're looking forward to it. Family-friendly event. It's free, so come on out and have a good time.
In Founder's Park, right?
Founders Park, yes. Yeah, it's at Founders Park. So, thank
Very
you.
good. Good luck. Thanks.
The next order of business is to make 4 appointments to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. The terms of Ross Duncan, Larry Glaspie, Jonathan Kinnick, and Grant Summers expire at the end of the month. Mr. Duncan, Glaspie, Kinnick, and Summers have all expressed interest in reappointment. There are also a number of other applicants that have expressed interest in serving on that board.
Okay. Any discussion? Or nominations?
Mayor, I'm not sure there's unanimity on these, so I'd kind of like to have everybody go through and select their 4, if you don't mind approaching it that way.
Not at all.
Like to?
Would you like to, who'd like to start?
I'll start.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. I prefer that.
Well, this is a really important board, and when we look at Parks and Recreation, it's not all just about athletics, and so I'm really looking forward to add diversity to this board, and I'm going to nominate Mr. Danny Burks, who has a background in working with our animals in our region, as well as, our dog parks, which is a part of the park program. Mr. Larry Glaspie, Ms. Karen Hubbs, and Mr. Jonathan Kinnick.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
First, I want to state that I sincerely appreciate Grant Summers' involvement in Parks and Rec for 3 terms on the board. Been a force in Parks and Rec for many years, been a tremendous advocate for increasing the diversity of things that we make available to our citizens in this town. So the fact that I'm not going to support him this evening certainly has nothing to do with what I think about him. I think he's a great individual. I think he's done a great job, commendable job. But several years ago, this commission decided that we were going to try to give other people the opportunity to serve on boards and try to limit terms to 2 years. We have some real good applicants this evening, so Grant, I appreciate your involvement in this over the years. I'm not, however, going to support your request to be reappointed this evening. Jonathan Kinnick's done a great job as chair to this point. Certainly will enjoy having him on the board for an additional 4 years if it is the pleasure of this body. So I would suggest Jonathan Kinnick, Ross Duncan, Karen Hubbs. And while I am a little bit reticent to not support one of our other members who's on there currently, who's asked to be reappointed, his attendance has not been good at the meetings, and so I'm going to support Mr. Burks for that 4th position.
Okay. Commissioner Wise?
Much of what I would have said has been said relative to Grant Summers. I would echo the complimentary things said, but I do think when you have a slate of other possible candidates who have not served 3 terms, so my preference would be for the 3 who would be seeking reappointment, and then Karen Hubbs for the reason articulated by the vice mayor.
Okay. Would you read your names?
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Duncan, Glaspie, Kinnick, and Hubbs.
Very good. And to not be redundant, I'll I'll echo the last two, Kinnick, Duncan. Well, I'm gonna stick with Glassby since he hasn't done 2 terms yet, and Karen Hubbs. So Kinnick, Duncan, Glassby, and Hubbs. So where does that leave us?
That leaves us with 3 for Duncan, 3 for Glassby, 4 for Hubbs, and 4 for Kinnick, 2 for Burks. So it would be Duncan, Glassby, Hubbs, Kinnick.
All right.
Do we need a motion now to appoint those 4, or does this?
I think
I think
that
we just did
satisfies
this.
roll
Okay.
call.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah. And if it had been as a slate, but correct me if I'm wrong. Well, okay. Very good. Next.
Next item is to make 2 appointments to the Johnson City Public Library Board.
I would make a motion that we appoint the 2 candidates, Sarah Davis and Michael Clark.
And I would second that. I'd also like to make a comment, serving on that board. Sarah Davis has been outstanding on the library board, and Michael Clark was outstanding on it. I had the pleasure of serving with him for about 6 years before him stepping off the board for a period of time, now requesting to be reappointed. He's an excellent individual and an asset to that board, so they're both good candidates.
Very good. That was a motion. Did we have a second?
Yes, I
Okay.
seconded it.
Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Tumita?
Yes.
Your next appointment is to make 1 appointment to the Board of Dwelling Standards and Review.
Very good. What's the pleasure? I think we have,
There are 2 very good applicants, both of whom I think have modeled constructive and positive contributions in our community that I applaud. This is one of those cases where there's more applicants than there are seats to fill, and that's a good position to be in. Better than the alternative of not enough applicants for the seats to fill. But with that said, one of the 2 applicants reached out and made an effort to advocate for their appointment, and with all other things being equal, that tips the scale in my mind. So I would make a motion that Gwen Hunter be appointed to serve on that committee.
I would
second.
second that.
very good. Any discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Tumita?
Yes.
Your next order of business is consideration of the consent agenda.
All right, from my right to left, anything you'd like to pull for separate discussion or vote? Commissioner White?
No, sir.
Okay. Commissioner Van Brock?
I'd like to pull A3 just to have Mr. Peterson kind of walk everybody through what that conversion process is going to entail, please.
Very good. Vice Mayor Brock?
None.
And I'm good. That was my only one, too. So, Mr. Peterson, A3, please.
A3 is a request to authorize staff to place the conversion of the Kefauver property under contract with the state of Tennessee. The state of Tennessee has refined their process, and they now require a formal application for the conversion. They also require that a fee of $10,000 be paid with the application, and we have a 12-month time period to conclude getting all of our information to the state to their satisfaction. The aspect of the conversion that requires ultimate approval by the National Park Service has not been changed. So the process would be to collect all the information, submit it to the state. The state will comment back to us. We'll get it into a form that is acceptable to them. They then send it off to the National Park Service with a recommendation, and then the National Park Service considers, deliberates, and whatever else they do in Washington, D.C. before we get an answer.
We hope that they deliberate a little bit less extensively this next time.
And by 2025, we should have an answer, right?
I just hope some of us are still alive when we get an answer, based on the last experience we had with them.
Charlie can
Thanks
just
for
retire
clarifying.
until it's finished.
Thanks for clarifying.
What was encouraging is that they have set a deadline.
Yes, sir. That is very encouraging.
So hopefully they will abide by one as well, so.
Yes, sir.
Very good. Anything else? Commissioner Wise, you look like,
No.
I hear wheels spinning.
Oh, yeah, that's just-
Okay, that's normal.
That's, yeah.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second, any further discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Tomita?
Yes. And here we are. We tried to move through that part quickly for you because we knew that this is why you were here. Just a couple of things before we start. There are two separate issues on our agenda tonight. Okay, one is the rezoning of that property from B4 to R5. So it would be going from a business use to a residential use, high-density residential use. So that question is the overall use of that property better as residential or business? That has nothing to do with traffic. Has very little to do with what goes there. It's just what it allows to go there. Because at B5, you could have a big car dealership or a big box supercenter. That's the question that we're covering with the rezoning. The next item is the concept plan. And that's where the developer is going to present what their concept for that property is and for their project there. That's where those specific questions regarding traffic, egress, capacity, number, that's where that information becomes pertinent. So I'd ask that we separate those into those two. You'll have an opportunity to speak if you'd like. I think you might hear some things that might put you at ease. But if it doesn't, then certainly we continue talking about it. They've been working the developer and our staff have been working very hard last couple of days trying to put something together that seemed to work for everybody. So we're going to let them present that part first in the concept plan discussion. And then from that point, then your questions and comments. Would ask that we don't, traffic's an issue, we know that. Certainly don't need all of you to get up here and tell us traffic's an issue. We can raise hands and know that traffic's an issue. If you have a different point to make, we certainly want to hear it. We want to hear everything you got to say, but in the interest of everybody's time, be respectful of everybody's time. Repetitious items. I mean, we've talked to a lot of you already, so I think we have a sense of what the concern is, and I believe Mr. Wise
And a
has.
point of order, the agenda indicates a public hearing on the ordinance about rezoning, but does not on the concept plan. But we would be doing a public hearing on both questions.
Yes.
To allow the
To
public
allow
comment to be more precisely directed at whether it's a land use question
Yep.
or a traffic, all the other stuff.
All right,
You ready?
we're ready. That's
Next order of business is consideration of ordinance number 4664-18. An ordinance to amend the zoning map of the city of Johnson City, Tennessee, being part of the appendix to ordinance number 1519, entitled An Ordinance to Adopt a Code of Laws and Ordinances for the City of Johnson City, Tennessee, and to repeal all laws and ordinances in conflict therewith, and amendatory thereof by changing from B4 Planned Arterial Business District to R5 High Density Residential District, certain portions of properties located at 0 Mockingbird Lane and North Lane. Refer to the site map for the specific boundaries of the property in question. This is the property formerly owned by the Mize and Walker families that now belongs to what was Glimshire. I assume it still belongs to Washington Prime. Thank you, ma'am. Ready for your consideration on second reading and public hearing. Hassan?
Sir. The piece of property under consideration for rezoning is directly behind the mall. There are actually two lots, totaling over 21 acres. The developer is requesting that this property be rezoned from the current B4 Arterial Business District to R5, which is high density residential. The mall property is currently B4. The adjoining neighborhood to the north is zone R5. To the west is zone R2, and to the south is zone R5. So this rezoning request will basically be an extension of the existing zoning in the north and in the south to create a continuous R5 zoning area. The future land use map designates this particular area for residential development. Currently in the B4 district, there are certain uses that this property can be used for. If changed, what are some of the other uses? Staff believes that this particular rezoning request is down zoning. Currently, it will permit theaters, hospitals, corporate offices, and clinics. It will permit microbreweries, beer serving establishments, liquor stores, retail and wholesale businesses can go on the property, vehicles, services, substance abuse treatment facilities, and you can even have residential developments, but those residential developments will have to be on the upper floor. Then on the first floor will have to be businesses. So that can currently occur on that property without rezoning, without the applicant going through this process. If rezoned, it will permit single-family homes, duplexes, multi-family developments, emergency or temporary shelters, bed and breakfast homes, residential homes for the aged, and boarding or rooming houses. These are the uses that are permitted in the R5 district. The current uses in the B4 district are high traffic, more intense uses. The ones in the R5 district are quite low. So rezoning this piece of property to the R5 district will be an act of downzoning the property, which will be more in conformity with the adjoining residential uses. Basically, what we'll be creating from a planning perspective will be, this will be like the mall. This missing middle housing, this area is currently missing. This will be the single-family residential area that we currently have. So we'll be creating kind of a transition area from high-intensity uses towards the low-intensity uses. This particular model is common here inside the city and has not caused any problem. We've not had calls or any issues where this is concerned. An example of this is the new food city on State of Franklin. We'll be right here. This is Skyline. You have a commercial area, buffered or separated, transition by multifamily, and then to the rear, you have single-family residential development. This is a similar model, which will be commercial, multifamily, single-family to the rear. We have the same behind Lowe's. This is Lowe's on State of Franklin, Market Boulevard. It's the same transition we have out there. This is the Heavens. So this is commercial. Directly behind it, you've got multifamily, and then transitioning, you've got single-family residential developments. We've not had any issues as far as this rezoning model is concerned. Staff believes that this rezoning will be more compatible with the adjoining residential development. It will provide smooth transition. It will be a better use for the property. The Planning Commission recommends approval.
This property was previously R5 a few years ago, and then it was rezoned B4 when the mall thought it was going to expand back to that.
Yes, ma'am.
And Mr. Peterson, you may know because you're older, but
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Thank you.
it was R5 for many, many years prior to that. Is that correct?
That property was R5 as far back as 1990, I know for certain.
Okay.
And I forgot to call Jack or Bobby today. Some people that were here much before I as to how long it's R5. I would assume that's probably been R5 since the mall was built. North Hills was built late 60s. The mall was built late 60s, early 70s. So I would assume that was probably R5 from the time the mall was built.
So this is returning that property to its
initials.
R5
Yes, ma'am.
and making it compatible with the lots next to it.
Yes, ma'am.
Any more questions? Very good.
Well, while Asong is there, when you have, so when you talk about down zoning and you talk about these different zoning classifications, what are some of the things that still come into play and what develops in an R5 when they abut an R2, for example, or the B4 of the mall? Like what are, as far as there are other standards that have to be met by way of buffering and screening, maybe talk a little bit about that, because there's some things that the zoning class and how they align to the adjacent zoning class will trigger by way of just how they meet up to one another.
Per the zoning ordinance of the city, any piece of property that adjoins these, the R5 district is considered medium impact. So if any use you're going to place in an R5 district will be medium impact, except it's single-family residential. The rest, multi-family, bed and breakfast, all these will be medium impact uses. And when you have a medium impact use that adjoins a no impact use, single-family residential is no impact, then the city requires a level 1 buffer, which is 1 row of trees, or you can have a fence, an opaque fence in that particular area. So the buffering requirement is going to come in play both adjoining the single-family residential area. In this particular section, although this is zone R5, the adjoining uses are still single-family residential, so the buffer will also be provided at that end.
Good. Well, very good. All right, let's open the public hearing. Is there anybody here wishing to speak in favor or in opposition of the rezoning? Would you come on up and state your name and address?
I'm at an extreme disadvantage. I have a severe hearing deficit, and my hearing aids decided not to work this evening. Very sorry. If all of you would turn your microphones up, especially.
I believe we're about where we are. So we're not going to, this is not a question and answer period. We will not ask you questions. We're here to hear your statement, and that's it.
The rezoning request is not the issue. The issue is building in a flood zone and putting what is really high-density multifamily rental properties in a flood zone. And my colleague, Carlos Connerly, who's also a planner from Tallahassee, my experience as a planner is from the city of Chattanooga, where I did my internship. I have dual training in architecture from the University of Tennessee School of Architecture and planning. My work in Chattanooga was exclusively planning. We would never have put R5 high density into a floodplain. We do other things with that, and I'll get to that in just a moment. You have had boots on the street, your staff coming out to our neighborhood after these 2 severe rains. What's happening here with regard to the densities that you're speaking of is everything is being pushed to us water-wise, and I'll let Carlos speak to the water issue. With me, as an architect and builder, I wouldn't build in that wetlands because you have karst region, not just 1 or 2 sinkholes, multiple sinkholes in this site. We don't build on sinkholes. I'm perfectly aware that you have allowed Mitch Cox to develop areas, including recently at Food City, to fill in sinkholes. We call this musical chairs of sinkholes, musical sinkholes. What you are doing by allowing Mitch Cox development to do that and to build this type of high-density areas in wetlands, you're pushing all the water to us. You're also pushing all the traffic to us. This is high density. And the difference between your planning staff, none of whom are architects, none of whom are builders, we do not push this type of high density traffic into an R2. That's what we are. We are R2, single family. And according to your database from the GIS office, there are about 250 of us, single family, owner-occupied residences. We have 1 or 2 rentals, 1 or 2 vacancies due to recent deaths. This is a very stable neighborhood. What this does to us, traffic-wise and water-wise, is destabilize a very stable neighborhood.
I know you probably can't hear us. We need you to go to the microphone because we can't hear you.
All right. I don't have the
And-
advantage of having his PowerPoint. The drawing is there, you
understand.
can see it. And if we back up, architects take a better look at this, a much wider
Can you
context.
address the rezoning, not the use? Okay, because that was what we talked about initially. How does this affect rezoning going from B4 to
We're not
R5?
objecting going from B.
Okay, then you're going to have to save your comments till we get to the site plan because this does not apply to the rezoning.
The
That was the-
rezoning
yeah.
does apply to point I'm making here.
Well, you've used your 3 minutes. I'll give you 30 more seconds to make it apply, or we'll ask you to come back for the
And
second
let
part.
me phrase it this way. Apply it in terms of if we don't rezone it, it's if R5 is a problem, B4 is even a greater problem in terms of its intensity and impact. So we can't, this isn't a choice of R5 versus some lesser residential, it's
I have another
B4.
alternative which you have not considered. This consideration of rezoning, and you must allow me to speak to this. The other consideration is not to build on it at all because it's a wetlands. And it's the last wetlands where it will absorb all the water you've pushed to us through Mitch Cox's developments and burying sinkholes all around us. So the other consideration that you have not thought of is to not build of it and make it into a passive park as opposed to building on every square foot of the real estate in our region. There isn't anything like that, and it would be advantageous to the commercial district as well as it is to us. And we can find a way to get to that and find a way to pay the price that the owners want for this without paving over sinkholes and building high-density rental properties in what is the basin for all the water that goes in there. We have video that you can have. That was filled. The whole lower part of the site, the majority of the site was filled. You can't build on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there,
I yield the floor to my colleague, my other professional colleague Connerly from Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you.
all right, anybody here, anybody else to speak for or against the rezoning? Okay. Correct. Anybody? Well, come on up. Yeah. Thank you.
And if you could give your name and address,
Yeah.
that would be helpful.
Thanks.
Glad to see you on the board, man. Herb Rupus, I live at 1815 Broadmoor, and, we got over there, I was probably about 7 years old, and of course, the flooding has been occurring since '69, and it's been doing the exact same thing. And I don't really, I'm going to speak to it, and, Floyd Hobson just passed away, and I wish he could be here to talk, and that was originally part of the North Hills development area. It wasn't developed because it was a floodplain. Floodplains do have a certain protection, and that's why it's never been built on. Wouldn't have mattered how it was zoned, R2, R4, and, smart developers didn't build on it in the 60s. They didn't build on it in the 70s, didn't build on it in the 80s, didn't build on it in the 90s. You got money-hungry people that want to make $1 million, sell it to some big corporation, and, build the 288 apartments, put in 1 swimming pool. That's a joke. That number of apartments should have 4 swimming pools, and I'm going to leave it at that. Make your money somewhere else. Leave it a wetlands like it's been since I know for a fact it's been a wetland since the late 60s. Thank y'all.
Anybody else? Come on up, state your name and address.
My name is McKenna Cox. I reside at 614 Willowwood Drive, and that is connecting to both Sundale Drive in the North Hills neighborhood and is at the top of the hill. On the back of my yard is Science Hill. You can't see it for the trees, but it's back there. To give you some perspective in terms of the zoning, I understand exactly what you're saying, which is we're reducing it from a higher density to a lower density housing. And the issue is exactly what our folks have been trying to express, is that it's not necessarily the downsizing that's an issue for us. It really isn't. It's the fact that the building is being proposed at all. And I know we're going to get to the plans on that. I just want to address this really quickly, which is there is actually an area in our neighborhood close to where the last gentleman who spoke resides, and it's behind several houses down at the bottom of this hill. Because what Sundale does is it comes down from Sunset and it comes down from Liberty Bell, if you've ever been on it, and there's speed bumps there, and it comes down and it creates this kind of dip, and that's the bowl. And what we're talking about is beside this bowl, and so that is where water goes. It goes downhill. Now there is a section behind some of these houses in that neighborhood that has actually, the city came in and kindly built us a lovely sluiceway, some culvert systems, some drainage systems, because there's already a sinkhole back behind several of these houses. And it's a place where we all know we don't want to have our kids go because it can flash flood like that. If it comes down a hard rain, or even if we don't see the rain, if the rain's somewhere else, it's going to come in that area. And when I first moved into this neighborhood in 2005, that was one of the very first things that my kind neighbors told me who resided in these houses when we were walking the kids, because they wanted to get back there and play in this concrete trench, right, which looks really cool, is don't do that because the water comes in quick and it comes in fast. And that is already a symptom of some of what we're trying to express to you guys. And I know that you guys are all smart people, and I'm sure you've thought about this, but we really want to reiterate that we're not aware of, and we haven't seen the evidence of any kind of drainage studies being done for this. And whether you rezone it to R5 or to B4, that problem would be the same. And so that's really more our issue, is that it's already in evidence in our neighborhood that we have this water coming in. We've had this problem for quite a while. The city's already had to deal with it to a certain extent. And I mean, even on top of the hill, my yard gets swampy. So we just live in a deciduous rainforest. It rains a lot, and we just ask you to take that into consideration, and to take into consideration the effect that it's already having on us, and that we are concerned it will have on us and on our property values. We all know what's happening with flood insurance right now and how expensive it is, and if we're not deemed technically a floodplain, it's going to be really hard for us to cover that as well if and when that happens. So that's another concern that we have that we want to bring to your attention. Thank you very much for your time.
I like just one comment. I was going to comment more on the
Would you
conceptual plan.
state your name?
My name is
Yeah.
Carlos Connerly. I live at 706 Belvedere in North Hills. I'm a retired city planner. I retired from the city of Tallahassee, Florida. And all I'm going to address in this is the rezoning. I dealt with a lot of issues like what they're talking about in Tallahassee. We've had 2 big rains here. That's the kind of rains we had in Florida. And you talk about flooding, that's just standard for us. That's what we dealt with. This site, in my opinion, should be rezoned to a passive urban park for teaching, a teaching park. It is a wetlands. It's got karst features on it. I'll go into all that later on. But this should be a passive teaching park. And I've seen parks like this, especially up north. The biology teachers will bring their kids down, let them experience all this in a nice park where they don't have to dodge football, baseball, and so on and so forth. That, to me, is the highest and best use for this property.
All right, anyone else?
Jonathan Peterson. I live on 2024 Sundale Road. I would just like to address the zoning issue that's in question. And it seems that we are limiting ourselves to the 2 zoning, whether we're going to rezone it to the R5 or whatever that means in legal speak. I would like the committee to consider the last speaker's request, is we actually look at zoning it as a park or preserve or wetlands issue while we're looking at the zoning issue. Thank you.
My name is James Fox. I want to say that my family and I live at 5 Northvale Court, right smack dab in the middle of the North Hills development. We lived there close to 30 years. We've seen the kind of flooding people are talking about. There are sinkholes all over the area. In terms of the zoning issue, I think the last gentleman, actually all the folks that have gotten up here to speak, have it quite correct. You've sort of presented it as one or the other. It doesn't have to be that. Regardless of the B4 or R5, if that intensifies the flooding, it intensifies the problems with sinkholes in that area. There are lots of families, there are kids here tonight that live in that area. During this last flooding, I had to chase off a couple kids from behind my house because the culvert back there was so flooded, they were playing in it, and one kid almost got washed down the stream there, all right? And so if you do this, if you would develop that area like that instead of like a park, you're going to be creating an attractive nuisance. And I think the city might have some liability in terms of that. And I think it would be very damaging to the families in that area who are taxpayers and who are voters. And believe me, this is going to be something that people will remember next election time. I'll be happy to speak to the other issue about the specific development in a few minutes.
Now, we've heard commentary on flooding and wetlands, so we've heard that loud and clear. So if you've got another issue, safety is always an issue, so, and always a consideration. So,
thank you.
Gotcha.
My name is Michael Thompson. I'm at 712 North Hills Drive, and it's similar to what has already been brought up. But as a sidebar to that, one thing that we'd like to do, as well as our neighbors, is walk in that neighborhood. There's in the morning and the evenings, people are walking all the time in the neighborhood. Right now, there are not sidewalks on most of those streets. There are some on Sundale, there are some on a couple others, but I know that North Hills Drive, which we live on, there is none. Broadmoor, there's none. And so whatever you consider as far as rezoning, and I would echo what's already been brought up, there has to be some additional infrastructure put in place in order to make that a safe environment for the families that live there.
Thank you. All right, anyone else?
I'm Mitch Cox, and I'm 105 Whispering Lake Drive, and I'm just going to address the things that have been stated, and mainly the zoning and some of the comments that have been made. When it comes to the site plan issue, I may be back again if you have questions. So, and I had a presentation to make, and it's supposed to be on here. I'm not sure where it is, but I think I can, for the sake of time, go through fairly quickly, but I'm looking for mine, not yours. I sent it to Nicole.
Oh, okay. Give me a second.
But anyway, in regard to the zoning, you all were wondering when things happened, and you're pretty close. But I think the sequence of events was that North Hills was done in the mid-'60s. Thank you, Hassan. And was done in the mid-'60s, and shortly thereafter, in the late '60s or early '70s, the mall was done. And what happened at that time was, I think all of it was residential. And when the mall was developed, they brought the mall in as a commercial development, a retail development, and they left this buffer part in the back, which was zoned R5. And it's zoned R5, this property and the property right south of it and the property right north of it were all zoned R5 for 40 years until the mall came along in 2005 and decided they'd like to expand the mall. And they got it rezoned to expand the mall and build a big box retail. Evidently, that never materialized, so here we are today, and there's a sign on the mall property, and they've decided they'd like to sell it. We were actually talking to the Walker property, to the Walkers, who have the property immediately beside it, about building apartments there, because we think it's zoned for R5 already. We could go in there and just build, what we want to build without doing anything but submitting a building permit. But this property is more conducive for the residential development. It's true that water goes down into that low part. It is absolutely not a wetland. It has never been a wetland. It may be in a floodplain, but in a floodplain, you can always raise the elevation out above the elevation of the floodplain, and it's no longer in a floodplain. Now, in Florida, everything's flat, and you have issues you can't really deal with. But in East Tennessee, we have ups and downs all over the place. And it's not a problem if you raise that elevation. In fact, that would actually improve the situation right here, because there's a huge box culvert that runs underneath that mall. Kids have been playing in it for years. It was built back in the 70s. And it's probably this wide and 5 or 6 feet tall. It's
6 by 6, probably.
6 by 6. It'll carry a lot of water. One of the reasons it floods is because the elevation, the bottom of the elevation of it is actually higher than most of that field where the Mize property is. And when we do our development, we will take some of the hills and we'll push them down in those holes, and we'll raise it up, and we put retention ponds in to detain the water, and the water will flow through there actually quicker and easier. And I think Phil can address some of those issues a little bit later. We had a long discussion this morning with the city engineer, Alan Cantrell, and Phil, and the engineers that we're working with. But all this flooding problem that they have, has been going on for 30 or 40 years. And back, 30, 40 years ago, you didn't have to retain your water. When people developed property, they just developed property and it ran downstream. And what the city's learned over these last years, they've got the most stringent retention pond requirement that of any city I've ever been in. They require you to retain the 100-year flood. They used to require you to retain the 10-year flood. Is that right? The 10-year flood. So they've gone 10 times that. Bristol, Kingsport, Knoxville, nobody that I've ever been to does the 100-year flood. But it's been an issue in Johnson City. We all know, we've lived with it for years. But this is not the same situation. We're required to do totally different things, and it's not, our engineers don't think it's an issue. We hired one engineering company to address all the water issues and the type of water, and is it waters of the state, and da-da-da, and all that. They determined none of it was. And then we've worked with our other engineers to design the site plan, which I won't talk about now.
Thanks. I'm Arlen Hopland. I live at 814 Regency Drive, and I have the sinkhole beside our home that floods, goes over the road. 4 years ago, I think they had a meeting, and they agreed that they would put this big white pump, and it was dedicated first priority there. But now it's a Food City. And Food City filled sinkholes in. They made a retention area. But the interesting thing is, the retention area doesn't retain it. They have to have the pump that they took from the Knob Creek sinkhole to pump the water somewhere else. It doesn't retain it. And what he's talking about makes no sense at all. He's going to fill the holes in and he's going to raise it above the floodplain. But you know what he's going to do? He's going to dump all the water down where we are. I mean, we are ready to move. The only thing is, I'm gonna probably get half the value of our home. They are destroying the North Hills area, and it's sad. I just can't believe that the city can't sit down and look and realize that if it doesn't matter what it's zoned, you shouldn't be putting anything in there that's high density, whether it's business or whether it's homes. That's just common sense. And the idea that you can raise it above the flood zone, that might help them for their insurance, but it'll flood everybody else. And before they cleaned the sinkhole out where we are, and it improved it a lot, they were actually going in and they were considering buying all the homes in that area, millions and millions and millions of dollars, because they were being flooded all the time in their basements. I just can't imagine them doing that. And you know what? Once a developer comes in and does that, they walk away and leave it, and that's it. Right now, Zandu Corporation put the sinkhole as a flood when they built the area where we are, and went back and I tried to discover who owned it, and I found out Zandu is has moved out into someplace else, and who's it belong to? And I finally got it traced it back to the county. And how did the county get it? Because they never paid the taxes. They just abandoned it. And then the taxes said, the county said, it's not our responsibility, because if it's in Johnson City needs to take care of it. Johnson City didn't even know they owned it. And they came in and they did some work. For the last 4 years, they just abandoned it. They're not doing anything. The pump is up at Food City, where they covered all the sinkholes up and got the water. I hope you really think about the long-term development and what you do. I mean, you're going to destroy an entire community. And I have so many people stop in. I guess they come to the stop sign by my house, and I'm in the yard a lot, and they're talking about moving and wondering what they're going to be able to get for their home. I don't think it's right.
I want to address rebuttal to Mitch Cox, what he said about Florida. Tallahassee, Florida.
Does that have anything to do with rezoning this property?
No, I'm just going to say, as far as my planning experience, that is an extension of the Appalachian Mountains down there. That ecology there is the same as here.
Okay.
So I'm just as qualified here as down there.
Anyone else wish to speak for or against? All right, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion?
I'd just like to make a quick comment, Mayor. I know that our Director of Public Works has a presentation that he's going to make that regards not simply stormwater, but traffic as well. There's some things that I think that there may be a little misconception about how waters are diverted from one area to another. And so that's not going to influence how I vote on this rezoning, but I do think everybody here needs to know that he's going to come up, he's going to try to explain some of the things, particularly Dr. Hopland, whom I've known for a long time. Some of his comments, there's some misperceptions there that I think might make you feel a little bit more comfortable. So expect those comments here when we get done voting on this.
But while we're still talking about this, I think Mr. Peterson made the comment about we're picking between two choices and preferring that the answer be something different than the two answers we have. We don't get to choose the question we're asked. We answer the question we've been asked. And the question we've been asked is B4 or R5 more appropriate or desirable for this property? That's the only question. Passive Park isn't a part of the question because we don't own it. And even if that becomes part of the conversation, there still has to be a zone applied to it, in the meantime. And so most of the comments that I've heard on the rezoning questions center back to issues of stormwater and safety and traffic, and we've certainly heard those, and really they're going to be more relevant to the next conversation as it relates to the concept plan. Whether it's R5 or B4, that's a land use question. And so I'm going to make a motion to approve this ordinance simply because I think R5 is preferable to B4 for all the reasons you all have said. And those are the two choices. Sir, the public hearing is closed.
Sir, please sit down. Please sit down.
The public
You
hearing
gave
is...
Mitch Cox
That-
10 minutes.
Yep,
You
please
only
sit.
gave us 3
Yeah.
apiece.
Okay. And so there's a question about applying a land use label to it. And whether that's R5, R4, R2, B5, or I1, that's not the question. Thank you, that was very, very beautiful. So, so we have to answer the question we've been asked. We can't, because that's the way the process works. So we have an
So this
ordinance.
is already a done
Sir,
deal.
No.
if you have another outburst, I'm going to have you removed from the room, okay? We'll give you time to speak again, but we didn't interrupt you. Please allow the same courtesy, okay? Commissioner Wise?
That's essentially it.
Okay. Any other comments?
And that was a motion to approve that.
Sure. Do we have a second?
I will second. You know, in any zoning issues like this, I kind of apply two rules of thumb, and one is it a reasonable request? And this one it's returning it to its original zoning. And second, does it meet the land use that's been projected for this area? And as that kind of residential buffer to the mall and to residential period, it does. So with that, I'm very comfortable in returning it to R5. The discussion on the use of that is a separate discussion. And so I second that, to return it to R5 from B4.
Any other discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Tomita?
Yes.
Your next order of business is consideration of a concept plan for the property that is referenced in a part of ordinance number 4664-18.
The concept plan before the City Commission for approval is to develop the villas on Mockingbird Lane. It will be 265 units, multi-family development, 140 one-bedroom, 107 two-bedroom, and 18 three-bedroom apartments. That's a breakdown of this concept plan that is proposed for approval. This concept plan was submitted to the Planning Commission for review, and it was recommended for approval by the City Commission. The zoning ordinance requires that a concept plan show some very specific elements: location of the buildings, the number of the buildings, of buildings, location of any buffers that will be involved in the project, ingress and egress, that's driveways issues. So there are some very specific elements that apply to a concept plan. A concept plan is not the entire construction plan of a project. That is something that the engineer is going to do along down in the process and submit to the city for review and approval. The developer in the R5 zoning district adjoining an R2 district, the zoning ordinance requires a level 1 buffer, which is 1 row of trees. The developer is proposing a level 2 buffer, which is higher. It's higher. It's going to be 2 rows. Basically, it follows the same paradigm that we had in the heavens. You have single-family development, and you have a level 2 buffer that was proposed behind there. So this is the same thing that the developer is proposing. He's required to provide level 1. He's providing level 2, which is higher and more dense. Here is also proposing to control traffic along this public street section that is extending. He is proposing to install traffic calming measures within this to control access and traffic within this particular street section. In the concept plan, he is not required to go into details on how that is going to look like, what particular measure he's going to use, how it's going to be designed. That is not required at the level of the concept plan. This is intended to slow traffic, reduce cut-through traffic volumes in the area, make that particular street section safer, and provide, safety for pedestrians, improve the quality of life in this area. He can choose subsequently from any of the models. It can be a roundabout, it can be a median, like we have in many other areas. It can be a chicane, or it can be a community, kind of a sidewalk situation. There are different models that he can use subsequently to enhance this particular area. In his concept plan, let me go back and mention this. There's been discussion, mention, a couple of mentions here and there on creeks and wetlands and this being a floodplain area and him building over a floodplain. The concept plan as proposed, the detention, he's supposed to show the area of the detention where he's going to detain the water. This is the area. So this is a detention pond area where he's going to control this water. The FEMA maps do not place a floodplain on this property. This is where you have a floodplain in this neighborhood on the other side of Sundale. This is a floodplain zone A. This is a floodplain area where the elevation has not been studied. The area of this property has not been mapped by FEMA as being a floodplain. This is the FEMA map. You have in this particular area an unmapped creek or wet, there is, if you go out there, you will see when it rains, water goes down on that particular section of the property, and that can be controlled through engineering work. I will leave that to the Director of Public Works to throw more light on it.
Hassan, I want to make sure I understand. The entity that determines our floodplains in Johnson City is FEMA. Is that correct?
FEMA designates floodplain areas. We also have regulations if you have an unmapped stream. You may have a creek that FEMA has not yet gone out and designated that this, we put in a particular floodplain over this creek. The city has regulations that control that kind of a scenario. It's called an unmapped creek regulation. This is one of the regulations we have in our floodplain ordinance, for example, that controls standards for unmapped streams. So when the plans, the full set of plans, eventually come in for review, the city engineering staff will apply these regulations and all other regulations that are applicable in reviewing the plan. Because he will be disturbing more than 1 acre, this set of plans will also go to TDEC for review. So there is a lot of work that is still going to go in. What we're looking at this stage is simply the concept plan.
How often does FEMA update the floodplains?
They made. Do you know when the last came around? So they do not have a set time now. But what we do is, if we have a development in the city and we determine those elevations, he's going to determine elevations. He's going to do a lot of engineering work on this side. We turn that map to FEMA. FEMA uses it, part of it, we are a community rating system. So FEMA uses that to update, the map subsequently when they come around. Welcome, man. And then there was also mention of sinkholes within that particular area that is building on. We have regulations that control sinkholes. If you go the engineering, they do the topography and they identify any sinkholes in that area. The engineering division reviews that for compliance with city regulations, and it will also go to TDEC for review. So the higher standards that the state is going to apply. This is a concept plan. It is not the end of the process. It's very important that I mention this. When we put out signs and we started receiving calls from the neighborhood, it's important that we let the neighborhood know what procedure this particular concept plan and the development process is going to go through. This is not the end of it. Approving the rezoning or the concept plan today doesn't mean the developer goes out tomorrow, pulls out the building permits and starts building. No. Once this particular project involves moving some lot lines, it involves him constructing a street section. Once that is involved, then he is within the context of a subdivision. It's basically what will happen with Ed Baxter Road. So he will have to go back to Planning Commission with his preliminary plat, street layout will be examined, get all of that improved, submit his construction plans, which will be reviewed by staff, TDEC and other agencies, and then he will do the construction, take it back to Planning Commission for final plat approval before the project will be completed. Planning Commission recommends this for approval. The City Engineering Public Works Department has done some tremendous work out there since Planning Commission looked at it in terms of traffic and some of these stormwater issues. And we'll be glad to present that to you.
Can Phil speak to those?
Sure. Since
Public hearing, let him lead off.
Well, he's not really part of the public hearing.
Okay.
If you would mind, give a brief overview of the traffic solution that you've come up with, and
Well, I would be interested to hear about the stormwater,
and
too.
stormwater, yeah. Since those seem to be two themes.
We have a presentation on both the stormwater and traffic issues that might help bring clarity, since I've seen a lot of discussion take place.
Could you speak up, please, sir?
This is a map of.
Phil, can you speak up?
This is a map of the watersheds in the particular area. What's in yellow is the site that's under consideration. What's in black are the boundaries of the basins in which the water flows, just in those basins. So the water has to go someplace. To the left of the screen, you'll see red dots. Those are sinkholes. Half of North Hills, actually the only outlet for the water in about half of North Hills, all of Town Acres, is through sinkholes. None of that water has anything to do with this development. So when we talk about water flows, we will only talk about the black line that is most closely associated with the yellow configuration. As far as sinkholes are concerned, back in the 90s, the staff noticed that people were filling in sinkholes, and so where does the water go? And we became overly concerned to the point that we hired an engineering firm to study where the water flows. And so there is a line of sinkholes that runs from Market Street halfway to Jonesboro and actually ends up discharging underground at roughly Oakland and Creekmore. So all the water that's flowing to those red dots and anything on that side of the page actually discharges at Oakland, has nothing to do with this project. We have issues, and so with the sinkhole, so we established very tight regulations as it relates to sinkholes. In the case of Food City, since that was brought up, Food City actually detains all their water. And the reason we take pumps out there is because the development regulations require 100-year detention. Without outflow, then you have to have that amount of space available. So if it rains and you fill up, let's just say you filled up half the detention pond, we have to release that water somewhere in order to restore the capacity of the 100-year. So we take pumps out and take it to sinkholes that are not full and discharge the water so that in the subsequent rain, there would be capacity to handle. So Food City, in that development, actually did sinkholes downstream of it a huge favor for Regency Drive. As was mentioned, stormwater regulations didn't enter into discussions until the 1980s. That's when the regulations came into effect. North Hills was built in the 60s. There was no detention at all of anything out of North Hills. But part of it goes to sinkholes, part of it discharges into waterways, if you will. In the 80s, so along Regency Drive, there were homes built, and all that water, if you can look at the basin associated on Regency, all that water flowed both above ground and below ground, flowed to that sinkhole. We made a commitment to go out from time to time in order to reduce using fire department personnel to lower the water levels so that we could assist homeowners in not having to pump so much. We made a commitment that after a rain event, when water levels reached what we consider a point of concern for having pumps in that area turned on, we would go out and pump the water out. And so we put a line over towards the yellow box, halfway into the neighborhood, to get the water to discharge not into another sinkhole, but rather into what I refer to as a waterway. Okay? So now we're talking about, so we have a different program for sinkholes. Some sinkholes are on private properties. You heard somebody talk about it here. Some sinkholes are public facilities. A lot of them are private. It happens everywhere. And it'll happen depending on the type of rain events that occur and where they occur. So now we talk about, well, what about this particular site? What are we going to require as part of the plan review process in order to get permitted, to get a building permit to build the facilities? You had asked us is there anything out there available? And actually the developer has to do some preliminary engineering, but not full engineering. We don't require full engineering during rezoning simply because we're trying to avoid the massive amount of upfront costs associated with developing those plans. But he has to, from his vantage point, provide enough detail to give him comfort that his investment is secure. So he provided a preliminary, to himself, he provided preliminary topos as to what the site would require. So this morning, we actually reviewed this site plan, this preliminary plan with the developer. There are some things of note. Number one, we're not recognizing any sinkholes on the site. We're not recognizing sinkholes that would even consider reducing the amount of flow into the site. So having said that, what this developer has to do is he can't block water to retain onto adjoining properties, the upstream properties, such as the residents of North Hills. He just can't do it. We won't allow it. And so we spent time to ensure that the points of entry that we are aware of today are adequate to get the water over to the culvert system that goes underneath the mall. And in our opinion, he has satisfied on a preliminary basis the ability to get all that water, not disturb it, not interface it with his water, but rather independently transport that water through his site and on to Austin Springs, is where it eventually goes in Watauga Lake. The second thing we mentioned to him was it's unstudied. So we want to make sure that in the review process, that any floodplains, if they exist, that those floodplains, just like any other developer in this town, he has to mitigate that. He has to replace it. We're not going to give up floodplains without some compensation of other lands or something in order to handle the water. We don't want to, we used to allow for filling right up to the floodway. We don't do that anymore without compensation. Number three, we want to make sure that the buildings that he's proposing will not get flooded. So we will pay particular attention to the height elevations of each of the units, not at the first floor, not at the living space, but rather at the footer levels, to ensure that they don't get flooded either from his development or from the water that passes through the development, from North Hills to the culvert. When you get to the culvert, we told him that we would expect a study done on the size of the culvert to determine its capacity to handle whatever size storm. Is it a 100-year? Is it a 500-year storm? That gives us clues as to how to look at the water that's being discharged from his site. Number four, his site cannot discharge more water than what currently is discharged. What that means is that the post-development rate of flow cannot exceed the pre-development rate of flow. So essentially what people are doing is and Mitch is right, we do have very stringent regulations. Those regulations require a holding pond that can handle a 100-year storm event. So as a storm occurs, he cannot discharge faster or more than what was discharged when it was vacant land. He can't do it. Otherwise, he is creating an impact downstream. He could create impacts of other culverts that we're having to address downstream. We don't want to continue to create a problem as a result of development. All of these things get reviewed during the building permit process. And the developer has been advised in no uncertain terms that we will be absolutely diligent to ensure that the water that comes from North Hills and off-site and from Science Hill High School and from that entire drainage basin I showed you, that water will pass through, will not be held back, will not be in any way disturbed, except it will be rechanneled. That's the way that you would handle the development. And we will ensure that the discharge of his holding ponds can discharge during high water events. And we had a discussion about that. And so we'll address it during the site plan approval process. There is nothing about this site that negatively impacts the flow of water in North Hills. There are no doubt that we've been in North Hills to help some of the residents in this room. No question. There is no question that the people who border this site have sinkholes and have water issues. And we can do everything we can to try to get that water out to these conveyance systems so that that water can flow through his site, the developer's site, and on to Watauga Lake. The second issue is traffic. We have not had, we were unable during the planning commission process, we didn't have any data to work with. In the site plan, if you remember the site plan, let's see, let me go back. You'll notice that what's been approved by the Planning Commission was a direct connection of Mockingbird Lane to Sundale. Now, in the review of site plans, we actually look at what we're connecting to. Sundale Road is a collector street. And there are different categories of streets, and they typically involve the amount of traffic that we would expect that each of those streets would be handling. So you have neighborhood streets, right? Then you have neighborhood feeder streets. Those are the primary streets that feed, and they have volumes that we look at around a maximum of 1,400 trips per day. Then you have collector streets. And collector streets actually are supposedly designed, unless you have to modify at intersections, upwards of 10,000 vehicles a day. And then they feed into arteries like Roan Street and State of Franklin Road. Those carry the big massive amounts of traffic, upwards of 50,000 trips per day. So when we looked at the site plan, we asked ourselves, what is it tying into? And Sundale is a collector. Well, if North Hills was developed prior to the mall, it was, out there is probably one of the first things to be developed. We agree with all that. And in the development of that, they put stub outs to this property in order to, in our opinion, was to expand the residential uses. But the mall comes in the 70s. And so the mall takes the front part, and then you have step-down zoning of R5 to the backside. But you have access points, and that's generally how the access points to those large tracts were developed. So when so now we're back to R5, and we're back to having a mall, and we have a street that ties directly into Sundale, which is fine. We prefer, for emergency services and police and fire protection, we prefer multiple access points into subdivisions. We prefer subdivisions to be integrated. We prefer all of those things to occur for the safety of the residents. And in no case that I'm aware of that has the connection of neighborhoods ever been a deterrent to the sale of property or ever affected negatively the value of homes. So that's what we have. But we didn't have the traffic data. So we went back to look at the data of Sundale. We looked at the volumes of traffic generated by this development. We looked at the volumes of traffic generated by the mall. We looked at volumes of traffic generated by the theater. And to come up with what could we reasonably expect from our point of view to happen to Sundale? Well, the answer is that we would expect half the trips generated from Mitch's development would access Sundale. Half of it would go to Rome. I had no better way of determining that, but that's what we used as an assumption. We took 10% of the mall. The mall generates 25,000 roughly trips per day. So we just took 10% of that. And then we added onto, and as part of that, the trips per day generated from the theater. We would expect that because it backs up when they're downloading, that part of those trips would access an alternate route and would use this route. And what we came up with was 3,380, about 3,400 trips per day. Well, what is Sundale today? Today, without school, Sundale is about 1,600 trips per day. With school, Sundale is about 2,000. So that means that we're talking about the impact on Sundale to rise from 2,000 to 5,000. Well, the collector status is fine, it can handle that. But did the nature of the street change? Because they've never had they haven't had the influx. They haven't experienced that. And so to them, after 40, 50 years of being there, Now, is that a significant enough change to change the nature of the street? And that's the question. Well, that's up to each of you. Do you believe that it changed the nature of the street? Well, we then looked at, and here's the traffic volumes on Sunday. We then looked at other streets, just to kind of give you a sense, because you drive them. Do you feel that the nature of that street is significantly different? So we had Skyline at 1300, Indian Ridge, fine. Swadley Road was one that we identified where there were homes on the street. We were trying to find the homes on the street and a street that essentially could be classified collector. Here's Swadley Road. Baxter Avenue, this one surprised me, but this was at 3,000 trips per day. So just think about your experience on Baxter. Think about your experience on Melrose. This is the street just past Fairmont School. You cut up through and that sort of thing. They're at 3,000. Then you get to Oakland. This is a count roughly at Monte Vista Cemetery. Now you're getting into areas where you have homes to kind of give you something comparable. Is that the nature of that street? The volumes would indicate, from our vantage point, that we would have similar results as Oakland, similar results as Indian Ridge on the west side, near, this would be near the school. And then we have Knob Creek, and this is a section in the 4-lane section, I believe. Our conclusion was that even though a collector can handle that, the nature of the street changes. And we're not in a position to recommend to you to do anything but figure out a way to minimize the integration of commercial traffic from the mall to Sundale. We think Sundale needs to remain residential. We don't have a problem with Mitch's development using, that was expected all along, that part of his development would use that facility. So we would not recommend a direct connection. Well, how would you go about preventing that from occurring? So before us, there are 4 options. One is the proposal that the Planning Commission submitted. The second is you could put a gate up at Sundale. Let me back up. Back up to here, or I'll go to here. The third option is you could not build a part of that street so that part of the development would actually access towards Sundale. You could have internal movements if they wanted to go towards Roan Street, and to kind of, without having to do much more than simply closing. So if you're in the mall, you're not going to drive through the development. You might have some of the theater folks do that. I don't question that, but not many. The third option was one that was has been discussed, is actually to put a gate at the Sundale side of the development. Here's the problem. You can't put a gate on public right-of-way. We contend that there's actually public right-of-way from this point in the back of North Hills to this point. And that was done because every property has to have a public right-of-way. And so if you put a gate here, then this becomes private. Well, is there anything wrong with that? No, but it does create, in my opinion, a problem with the person developing the other acreage, who I believe should have as much flexibility in the development of those acreage as this person has in the development of these acres. And so it's our preference that there be sufficient public right-of-way in order to allow for maximum flexibility for that developer. So that leads us to a fourth option. And the fourth option is, what about if you just put a gate in the middle? So that people on this side would access through the gate if they wanted to go towards Rome. These people on this side would access through the gate if they wanted to go towards Sunday. And that seems to be acceptable by the developer in the discussions we had, but I'll let him speak for himself. Bottom line, there ought to be something done. Bottom line, we don't see justification for a direct connection from the mall back to Sundale. There needs to be some disruption. Any questions?
Thanks, Phil. I have a couple questions, if I can go back to the earlier comments about stormwater. You said not recognizing any sinkholes on the property, and I'm just wondering if you could say, does that mean that they may be there and you're not recognizing? Qualify those words, not recognizing any sinkholes.
There are depressions, in our opinion, that have the water flow, which may not be on this site. The water flow from Science Hill, we have issues about overflows and people getting flooded, and we're always having to deal with something. If you get down near the road on this side of the street, there are depressions. The depressions appear visually to accept water. Well, we're not going to recognize that, because even if they were, what happens if they get clogged up? Then where's the water go? And I didn't want any of the valley running through the site to be reduced by not recognizing that as a flow-through water system. I didn't want anybody to take any water that goes to what they may think are sinkholes, which we don't recognize based on the topos. But you cannot, we will not allow them to use that to give themselves credit in order to reduce pipe size or pipe cost. So we want to make sure that this development can handle everything.
So the net effect of not recognizing any sinkholes is to make the standard the developer lives up to more stringent.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, if you'll go back yet one more slide. Actually, no, the other way. Would you just clarify a little bit where the water from the Food City watershed goes when it is pumped out of that retention area? And the reason that I asked you to do so, comment was made earlier that was creating an impact over into North Hills, and everything that you've suggested to me as we've talked through this issue a little bit is that, in fact, it does not impact North Hills, that it drains in a totally separate area.
Okay, here's North Hills, and let me just clarify, this is sort of Sunset Drive, right through here. And Sunset Drive wanders down along this black line over to this point, and that's State of Franklin Road, the big 4-lane. This is where their holding pond is, and we pump to a sinkhole on this side. All the sinkholes drain this way. They don't go towards North Hills at all. They're underground. They're going through Belmont Acres. They're going through Town Acres, so on. You'll see lenses, say, behind the other theater. There's a lens that you can see the water pass through. And discharges at Creekmore and Oakland. So it has nothing to do with anything associated with this development.
So your staff's estimation since the Food City project was done was that what occurs on that does not impact the area around Regency or any of that area at all?
It doesn't come close. That's a whole separate issue, and actually is guided by a whole separate set of regulations.
Okay. Now, as you've looked through the plans that the developer has submitted to this point, preliminary without a doubt, the stormwater is going to take a lot of working through and a lot more engineering to get to the point where final approval is going to be considered and potentially given. You don't see anything that would suggest to you that what is required of us by the state and what we require of the developer as a city, you don't see anything that would suggest to you that we're going to have a problem with not being able to handle the water, and that we're not, in the process of approving this, going to create a situation where downstream we have worse flooding or upstream we have worse issues with flooding as well. I'm understanding that correctly, am I not?
That is correct. This particular site plan has no impact upstream nor downstream, if it can be built to our satisfaction on the discharges.
Well, I have to tell you, that's been one of my biggest areas of concern, is that we not see either an upstream impact or a downstream impact. And so I'm glad that this has been looked at critically, and it certainly helps my thought process in how to approach moving forward.
As you know, we have prioritized in looking at funding options in order to address Austin Springs. There's no question that Austin Springs has been impacted.
Right.
Simply because there was no detention facilities when a lot of this stuff was being built. So some things have changed, and we have prioritized. We don't want any development to add to the issues that we are facing along Cobb Creek.
Yeah, I know you don't, and obviously this commission does not either, so I'm glad it's been looked at critically.
Bill, could you talk just a little bit about, there's water coming into North Hills from several different sides, okay? There's some homes, some lots, even on the interior of North Hills, which wind up, when we have rains like we did last week, with collection of water in their backyards. That's not coming from the sinkhole, or maybe it is, but could you address kind of where that water's coming from and why that's happening?
Well, there's a couple of things occurring. Number one, in the area that's feeding towards the development, there are natural drainage ways. They may look like your yard, you contour them, you mow them, you play on them and stuff. But when it rains, you're going to get water flowing down those natural drainage ways. We don't maintain those. They just happen. That's just part of nature. We have them all over town. We don't get involved in that. When you develop property, what the standards was for drainage systems to meet 10-year storms. And so when they were not putting in structures at that time that would handle 100-year storms. And so you may have backups occur wherever you have a structure that would only meet a 10-year storm event. And if you have a 25-year storm event, and last week we had 2 that were in the 50-year neighborhood, if that occurs, then it will build up and it will pond. And it's very difficult for us to figure out how we can alleviate that, but what happens to the next person? A lot of times we just say, if it's not in the house, if it's just in your yard, let's live with it.
So I could buy a property with a natural drainage area running through it and not really know it
That's
until
possible.
until a big heavy rain
Yeah,
occurs.
what we require today is you have to show us when you're building a home. You have to show us how the flow patterns are around that home. If you are anywhere near a floodplain or there's a thought of flooding, then your elevation of your home, even though your yard may flood as a result, the footer elevation has to be 1 foot above the 100-year level. So we're trying to put safeguards in for residents and to say to build. Sometimes we have to get tough on the builders. A lot of them do really good job. I put Mitch in that category. I think he does a good job in building, and we have a lot of good builders. I think we've got the message across to them that we're paying attention to it, and you are not going to get a CO unless we feel comfortable that the drainage around the structure is fully satisfied.
All right. Any more questions related to this project? We could be here all night talking about flooding, especially with some of the other areas.
So you talk about a project not being allowed to contribute, a net contributor to stormwater from its current unimproved state to its future state, and that enforcement responsibility rests exclusively with the city, or where all does the enforcement mechanism, and how do you measure that? So for the neighbors, what is the assurance that, we can all talk about that, and then if it doesn't manifest itself, what are the consequences?
Well, the rule of law, you can't back, if you live next to somebody and the water drains through your property, you can't raise your property and back it up on him. The same way with these massive developments, you can't do that. You can't create a problem downstream by increased flows. So that's why the regulations are the way they are.
But you don't call 911 for that. So who do you call to say, I think I've been negatively impacted, and then how do you demonstrate that you've been negatively impacted?
McKenna Cox?
If you have been negatively impacted, generally speaking, what happens, they call us. And then we go back to them and say, okay, this is a private property owner who has done something. Your recourse is to sue them. If there is a remedy that we can help with, because it may impact a public drain system of some sorts, then we may participate.
And then I'd like one more question to shift gears entirely now, not stormwater, but traffic again. Why does a connection need to exist at all between Mockingbird and Sundale? What would the reason be for that?
We prefer to have multiple access points into developments. If that were not to be, then the development needs alternate access points into it in order to minimize negativity associated with fire protection, police protection, EMS, etc. We talked about alternatives with the developer today. This plan, he prefers to have access to Sundale as his preference as a developer and how he rents out units and that sort of thing. That's not my job. My job is to say, in the best interest of the community, we want multiple access points.
But that wouldn't necessarily be Sundale. That just needs to be multiple access points to satisfy your concern.
Correct.
The developer might have different rationale, but I'm just asking you. Okay.
But I think what I also heard you say, that the adjacent properties have access to the right-of-way, which would be Northgate, into their properties at some time in the future.
Right now, the way it's been approved by the city is that when the property was subdivided across the street, that there was a public right-of-way associated with it. Now, Mitch and I can go back and forth, but we're not backing off of that position, because every property created, every property has to have public right-of-way. So that's what was intended. If that was the only thing, then they would have to build a street, and if they couldn't get access towards Rome, that is their access is to Sundale. And that's been approved ever how many years ago.
Any more questions? Thank you, Phil. All right. As soon as I get the projector powered down, we'll open up public hearing. Now, just note, there was no public hearing advertise, but since you're here, we're going to do it. Now, I will ask you also, one more time, to limit your comments. We've heard about flooding. It's been addressed, so if there's something that you've seen presented that gives you pause, please comment on that. But general floodplain, wetlands, all that, I think we're pretty good with. If there's something in particular to the traffic plan, the plan of traffic flow, please address that. But I believe we've addressed the direct access and not being an option. So that'll keep the volumes, I think, well within limits. So we can, unless there's something particular to the plan that's been presented that you've seen, please limit your comments to that. Let's not address anybody in particular. We're not here to opine on individuals. Let's not do that. Let's be polite, and let's be succinct and not repetitive. So we want to hear everybody, but let's do it efficiently. So.
Again, I'm McKenna Cox at 614 Willowwood Drive. First of all, I want to thank our engineers and our planners for some excellent work, and not just because they agreed with us, but and thank you all for your thoughtful questions. I certainly had some of mine answered today, and we appreciate you guys taking the time to do that. I just wanted to say a couple things. One is, just for clarity's sake, I know the agenda and some of the signs and some of the things that have been posted refer a lot to North Drive. We're not talking about North Drive, right? We're talking about North Gate, which is actually connects directly to Sundale from this Mockingbird Road. Thank you for leaving the map up for me. And comes into Sundale. So just for clarity's sake, I think we all know that, but I just wanted to make sure that was the case. I think North Drive was too steep to connect. And the second option is that, or the second point I'd like to address is I really appreciate the discussion about gates and about some different options that we have available to us. Of course, I know that the developer has a preference and the city has a preference. Of course, I think I speak for a lot of our neighborhood owners when I say, Mr. Wise, apropos to your question, is that of course our preference is not to have a connector at all. We certainly, appreciate the offer of compromise, but that's something that we would certainly prefer. And the issue is that we don't build neighborhoods for trucks. I mean, we don't build neighborhoods for police cars and fire trucks, who are very important, and we appreciate our first responders, but we don't do that. We build it for the people who live there. We've discussed a traffic plan based on the people who live there. Thank you very much. We've looked at that choice based on who lives there. And you guys have thoughtfully looked at the water plan based on who lives there and our drainage plans. So we'd ask that you take the same consideration when you're looking at whether you build that on that stub out, whether it's a public right of way, whether it's actually coming through directly from developer land, but that we make sure that we're really looking at that from the people standpoint versus the truck standpoint, and that there are a lot of ways to access the mall. We've all been there. We all go there a lot. I know all the back roads because I live near there. I don't need another one. And I think the folks from this development don't necessarily need to access our neighborhood. Not to say there may be lovely people living there, but that's just not necessarily a need that we have and that they may have. So we would ask that you explore some alternate options in terms of having access to address those safety concerns I know you're very concerned about, but also look at where we are, and even with the gate, I'm not an expert in this area, but even with the gate, it seems to me that you're still going to have some extra traffic flow. You're going to have some people who want to come from the high school, go to the high school, get to Knob Creek. North Hills is a straight shot. North Hills Drive across to Knob Creek. Walk on that every day with my kids and my dogs. Kids are riding bikes everywhere, and so even just a small increase is going to not only affect Sundale, it's going to affect our side streets as well. None of which have lines, all of which have a low speed limit, and many of which connect to these arterials, such as Knob Creek that you're discussing, that I think would be tempting for people, 200 plus people, to utilize to cut across the neighborhood as well. I mean, I know I would if I lived there, to be honest with you. I mean, if I had the choice between taking Run Street and taking North Hills, I'd pick North Hills. And if the decision is made to do that you guys put very careful consideration into sidewalk options, into more speed bump options, replacing the 2 speed bumps that came out when it was repaved and weren't replaced on Sundale, and some of our other issues, because it really is a well foot trafficked and dog trafficked neighborhood. Thank you for your consideration.
Sure, thanks. Hey, good afternoon. Michael Mabry. I live over on 1808 Broadmoor.
And just a couple of points, but I'll try to be strategic so I can make good use of your time. I mean, obviously, we're all concerned about the water, so I'm not going to dive into that too deep. My concern is that in one breath, I didn't catch his name, but he said that he's very confident that he can reroute the water. But in the next breath, he said, we're unsure because we haven't done the studies. So that to me is kind of like passing the bill to find out what's in it. I don't think that's wise to make a decision without having the proper studies in place. That just makes sense to me. Obviously, I'll leave that up to the planners, the architects, the designers. And I had something real brief. If I could, it's about a 6-second video. Let's see. There's a lot of background noise. But this is the wetlands, like we called it. And this was just after one rain, and I'm sorry that it's sideways. But this is where they want to put this apartment. This is a lot of water. And so to say that there's no way this will affect our neighborhood is ludicrous, but for lack of better words. Even if FEMA did not call it a drain or call it a sinkhole or whatever the label is they give it. And so that's our concern for the water. We did a lot of money into the downtown, and it looks beautiful, but it still floods. So we can try to give the most confidence that we can, but I guess where's our assurance that our homes aren't going to flood? I mean, personally, I'm a physician, so decisions I make, I'm liable for. So I would ask Mitch or anyone else, are they willing to take liability for flooding that did not exist prior to the building of this operation? That'd be interesting to see, just to sit down and talk about. If we were building this in Boones Creek, it might be different. Again, the Ridges or in other neighborhoods, people might feel differently. But this is our neighborhood, and we enjoy it. I moved back to Johnson City because it's peaceful, because there's not a lot of traffic, which is really important to us. And then I guess the second question is, what kind of city do we want to be? Do we want to be in Asheville, where we build on every square inch, and it's building after building after building, where we just sprawl? Or do we want to be like Portland, that takes its neighborhoods important, where they're actually making streets smaller, because the studies have shown for 25 years when you make roads wider, they're less safe. There's no decrease in fire deaths, but there is an increase in traffic accidents, car versus person, car versus biker, car versus car. So it does not make sense to make roads wider or bigger for fire trucks. So we need to keep our neighborhood safe. I have a dozen photos, if you'd like to see them, of me and my twins walking around the block, old ladies, young families. The high school track team comes and runs in our neighborhood because it's nice and safe and quiet. And so those are some of our main concerns. And then I guess just the final point, I'm probably at my 3 minutes, but I guess the final point is how do you protect our property value? Any road that has more traffic has less property value. I'm not a realtor, but that's kind of common sense to me, unless it's for the property value of a business, right? And so how is a city going to protect? We have a $90 million property base just in North Hills, and usually the property taxes are half of what it's actually worth. So call it $150, $180 million in taxes as a tax base just in North Hills and 250 single-home families. And so how are you going to protect that? Because you're on the council for the people. And so that was just my question to the council. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ryan Matthews. I live at 618 Holly Hill Road. I apologize. I'm going to try to pull this back up. I'd just like to speak about the traffic in the neighborhood there. When the gentleman was telling us about the options for access to Sundale there and those 4 options, he said one thing that I didn't hear was essentially what was done on Green Line near People Street. If you're not familiar, that's in between the Kmart and the new Keller Williams building up there, where they separated the residential area from the heavy traffic and business area of People Street with road barriers. So it's still accessible to pedestrians. It's not necessarily a gate, but it's just blocking the road to traffic. Especially in that position, I think that could be good for people on both sides of where that barrier would be. Because I think it'd be better if there were high school students or I guess anybody walking to Liberty Bell, that complex there, to be able to walk on Sundale. I think that would be better for them than having to go down Roan or some alternative. But I, like we've already talked about, I don't think it'd be great to have all that traffic. And just looking at it, I'm not an expert on this, but I don't understand why there couldn't be a separate access on the north edge of this plan here. Just going essentially into the side of the mall parking lot. I understand that it's probably not something that we can make a change on today. You're not approving my idea of the plan, but going forward, I think it would be really important to consider alternatives there, because I think there are alternatives to this as far as traffic is concerned. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Margison. I live at 1812 Broadmoor Road. My undergraduate degree is Stanford University. I got my master's degree in education from ETSU. So I'm here as a teacher and a mother. I have 2 children in the neighborhood. And I want to thank you for acknowledging that Sundale is residential and that influx of traffic would ruin us. I really, as a mom, I've got to put a person on it for you. Working with young children, there's an elderly woman who walks with a walker down the street in the mornings. I didn't get her picture because I've been teaching. Children playing, my son and a couple of his friends riding bicycles. I love living in North Hills because it allows us to have healthy children. As an educator, I know that kids in America are really struggling. They're addicted to video games, they lead sedentary lives, they're fighting obesity. Okay, in our neighborhood, they can get outside and play. It is special. Another problem where researchers are just really finding out is that our kids in America are stressed out. They're overscheduled, they don't have time to go outside and free play, or they don't have a place to go. Our kids do. North Hills is really special in that we're able to raise emotionally and physically healthy children in this neighborhood. So I love that you don't want to put too much traffic through, but I would just encourage you to not put any more traffic through. Because right now, about every 5 minutes, a car goes by, and you know what? We probably know who it is, or at least we recognize the car because they're our neighbors. And they know to slow down, and they know to watch out for kids and dogs and baby strollers. And the increase, a couple thousand a day or 1,000 a day, those people are just going to be trying to cut through to Knob Creek, they're going to be trying to get to the mall, and they're not going to be watching out for our kids, and someone is going to get hurt. And whoever it benefits to open that road up, it's not worth the health and the well-being and the safety of our neighbors and the health and well-being and safety of our children. So assuming we can get the water worked out, I'm not an engineer, I'm a teacher and a mom. Assuming we can get that worked out, build the place, but please don't open up traffic to Sundale. They can go out on Sunset, they can go out on Roan. Thank you.
I'm Carlos Connerly. I live at 706 Belvedere. My question is, has the traffic signal been considered for Sundale and Northgate? The reason why I ask that, I feel like one's needed. That's a school bus stop. We have parents that park back in that stub out and they wait on their kids. And their kids get off the bus and then they leave. And the kids cross the street and they disperse on down through Northgate, and then they just disperse out through the neighborhood. What I would like to see, if this goes through, a traffic light installed with crosswalks with a punch button so the kids can cross the street safely. Now, to me, that's essential. If this goes through, a traffic light's going to be required. I know, we don't want to go through, but I'm saying if it does go through, we don't want it to go through. And another reason why I don't want it to go through is what if the electric cowboy opens up again? And you've got that kind of traffic late at night coming out through our neighborhood. Just consider that.
Anyone else?
My name's Dwayne King. I live at 4000 Bradford Lane. I don't have a dog in this hunt because I live behind Indian Trail. But I came tonight because, and I wasn't sure when to speak because whether it's R5 or B4, I don't think that really matters. You know, if that area gets developed, there's a large amount of that water that never leaves that area. And I've heard as high as 50%. It's held in the vegetation, the trees, and absorbed into the ground. That water, when that ground gets covered, now has to go somewhere. I live behind Indian Trail. You may all be aware of the big ditch and holding pond that engineers designed to hold the water. Well, that holding pond goes through my backyard. I've spent thousands of dollars personally remediating damage that I get to pay Johnson City Utilities for the right to let them run that stormwater through my backyard. I've talked to Phil, you. I can tell you when that problem's there, it doesn't go away. You'll deal with it the next 20 years. I just ask that you make sure, I'm all for development. I'm for Mitch Cox developing this whole area because when you raise the tax base, then you raise the property taxes get collected and hopefully you won't raise the taxes on and fixed income old man like myself. So, but I do challenge, even I'm just one person that stormwater damages their property. But if it damages one person's property, that's one too many. So I do ask that you, once again, if it's B5, it can still be developed with all the same connectors. So I don't see that that's really an issue. But just make sure that nobody gets damaged when that water has to go somewhere because there's going to be more water. I've watched the water increase through my backyard as they've developed all that area, as they 5-laned the road. The water that goes through my backyard increases. Has it been in my house yet? No. Has it been to my back door? Yes. I've not met an engineer yet that doesn't think they can out-engineer God. And I'm telling you, whatever water we've had fall here, we can have more. Go to Pittsburgh, where my in-laws are from, and you can find out about that. But that's all I'd ask from you.
My name is Jeffrey Allen Lucas. I live at 1814 Broadmoor Road. My wife has been there for 44 years. We have been married for 36. Anyone that takes Statistics 101 knows and then uses statistics as we do in construction and architecture. You can make statistics do anything you want them to do, and you can fit them into where you want to go, which is what Mr. Penzola is doing here. 1/2 from the villa, I disagree. 10% from the mall, totally wrong. 0 from ANC, we disagree. 0 from Roan, totally wrong. We do not recommend direct connection, gates or otherwise. And we will go back to the precedent of Green Line Road and say, you were forced to close that. That's the precedent. It is identical to the circumstances here. State of Franklin is a major arterial, urban arterial, so is Roan. You are ignoring that. You are not addressing Roan, and that's where the traffic will come through, just like it did on Green Line. We do not want any of that cutting through and using our neighborhood, which is a beautiful neighborhood, a stable neighborhood, and a safe neighborhood, to be used as a shortcut for the benefit of one developer. Thank you.
My name is Froylan Hernandez. I live at 1823 Sundale Road. That's a very intersection with Northgate and Sundale. I'd like to invite you all to come down there and look at that intersection, see the size of the streets and what it's going to look like. The street where the bus stops and the people wait for their kids is a little bitty street. And even Sundale, if you drove to it and somebody's parking on one side, you still don't have room for two people to pass. The streets aren't that big at all. So come down and look at it and see what it's like. Thank you.
I'm Gail Gallimore, and I live at 1710 Sundale Road. I've been living there for approximately 40 years, and what I was there when we formed a neighborhood watch so that we could get speed bumps put in. We clocked people from the high school going 93 miles per hour. Additional people, or additional inexperienced drivers particularly, would not help one bit. I've had all of my neighbors have moved from Sundale because of the traffic. They can't even have their grandkids come in. So if you increase the traffic by increasing the contact with the mall, I think that's the death knell for the whole neighborhood.
Anyone else? Mr. Cox?
Well, I'm not going to say a lot of things, but I guess one of the things that comes to mind is if I was sick and had cancer, would I seek the advice of a doctor or would I seek the advice of lay people? And in this case, I would certainly seek the advice of the professionals. And in this case, you've heard what Phil said. You've heard, I think, recap again what the traffic was, just the short part. That when you calculate, first of all, I know it, but what part was attributed to the apartments? Okay, so there's the number one, you heard him say that several years ago that the owner of the property actually at a planning commission, city commission meeting, agreed to convey a public right-of-way to Mockingbird Lane for that property. Now, what has happened, and the thing that Phil and I were going back and forth on, it was the minutes of the meeting say that they were required to do it, which they posted a bond, and they did a plat. Somebody never recorded the plat. So when the property was conveyed from that property owner to the mall, it's not in the chain of title now. So does the city is it already a public right-of-way? The city thinks it is. So if it's already a public right-of-way, all we're doing is connecting onto it. And we certainly have the right to do that. And the people on the lower side of the street, this lot that you heard him say, that's the only access to it. So what we did, we spent 2 hours this morning trying to say what can we do to have the least amount of impact on this neighborhood and still be able to do what we need. I mean, our people, I think 75% of the people in the apartments will go towards Mockingbird Lane. If they're going to North Johnson City, why would you go any other way? If you're going even to South Roan Street, why would you go any other way? If you're going to Science Hill High School, you're probably going to go out that way and just go up Sundale. It's a collector street. It's designed to carry 8,000 or 9,000 cars a day. And it's designed to carry that. it's what we would put onto it is still a third what that would be. And you just, the property owners have the rights to do that. I mean, you know, it's not, and for, you know, we've sat here and heard all these things. In my 35 years I've been developing property, it's not the first time I've ever heard these comments. And I think if you go around to all the neighborhoods that we have developed, I can't think of any that it's not a nice neighborhood. So I would just say that we are fine to put up to do the gate, and the only people that would be coming through are people in that, are about a third of the people in there. There wouldn't be any through traffic at all. That was something that Phil said he was okay with. It's something that we're okay with, and it's something that when we had our public meeting with the city, with the neighborhood, we were required to have a meeting with them at the very beginning. It was suggested by one of the neighbors to do that. And I thought about it, and I said, that's really a good suggestion. I don't have a problem if we put a gate. So that's what I would request. That's what I think is a sensible thing for everybody.
Please don't interrupt. This is not a question and answer period, ma'am, I'm sorry. It's comment.
Yeah, it's required by me to have a public, to notify the people within a certain distance, and we did that, and we had that meeting. We had it right here in this chamber.
Thanks.
It is the property that touched your property, the property you're trying to develop. You didn't have it with everybody in the neighborhood. So don't give that impression that it was with everybody.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we did what the zoning code and the ordinance would ask us to do. And we had it, and so it doesn't.
Yep.
I have a question.
And we had that discussion, which is why you guys are here tonight. Let me just address that, is that, no, we complied with the requirement of notification, but when we realized that didn't spread very far is when we put the brakes on and gave, so please understand, we know that. And the reason you are here now and this wasn't already passed is because we did recognize that and did want to give you a chance, folks that lived outside of the area of notification, to be involved again, and now you are here tonight. So if that
when the street at at Sharon Drive was connected a few years ago, the whole neighborhood came out just screaming and hollering, saying all the things that these people have said as well. And I think if you go talk to them, they would say it's been an asset to them. They're glad to have it when it connected to People Street. So anyway, I don't want to just stand here and talk. If you have any questions, I'm happy to.
I do, Mitch, thanks. I know you want two entrances, and the city wants you to have two entrances into the complex there. Have you looked at any other entrance on the north side that would go into the mall at the other end? Is there any possibility there?
The other option is to go up North Lane. Well, that just runs us out onto Sunset. Sunset's a whole lot worse place to get out than Sundale. Sundale is... So, well, if you lived in their neighborhood, you'd feel the same way you feel.
I mean on the mall side. Is there any way to get out on the mall side down further at the end of the...
There is, but we think that we have that...
Folks, please give him an opportunity. He was asked a question. We didn't... You all weren't interrupted while you were speaking. Please afford that same courtesy to Mr. Cox, even though you don't agree with him. Afford him that same courtesy, please. No.
Do we have any more opportunity to comment?
The public hearing is still
The public
open.
hearing is not closed, sir.
Yeah.
So let who's at the podium speak without being interrupted, and we'll give plenty of time to rebut, okay?
So
continue, please.
We have explored it. The topography is is not conducive for doing that. We talked about it today. But, you know, this property has been planned this way for 40 years. It was always intended to be connected. And that's all we're asking for. We're willing to put a bigger buffer in than we're required to do. We're retaining all this water, the 100-year flood, which is the reason their neighborhood is flooding, because it wasn't required back when their neighborhood was built. But we're doing all these things. We're spending a lot of money. It's going to be a nice development, probably $25 million development. And it brings a pretty big tax base as well. And we think it's important for us to do this development to be able to have an access back there. And we're willing to gate it, so we don't think it's going to have a big impact, and that's our request.
What have your studies shown, when you have complexes like this, you've done traffic studies, and let's say there are 400 cars in there that are going to have to go through a gate, and you think, I don't know what the percentage is that you think will go out the Mockingbird side versus Sundale. But I know y'all have done studies, and Phil, I think I've heard you address this as well, about the time of day people leave. It's not like everybody's leaving all at one time. No. So is there some kind of rule of thumb that you use to, understand the traffic patterns of a neighborhood like this?
The one thing that I've learned, I only started developing apartments about 10 years ago. And what I have learned from doing those developments, it has been a shock to me how little traffic is generated from the apartments. He said there's 3,000 cars a day going up and down Sunset. We generate less than 800. And I.
No, it was 1,000.
All right.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Would anyone else like to address?
I didn't even get my 3 minutes. If this goes through while they're building this thing, which way are the trucks going to come in through? The construction trucks and the equipment and stuff?
Good question.
Okay.
I still want you guys to come down and visit, see that corner.
Actually, I have.
I don't have a problem with the construction traffic going.
In the review of the site plan, we can make sure that the construction entrance doesn't come in from this subdivision. That's something we can control in the site plan review process. Okay. And I just wanted to call the attention of the City Commission to one very important thing. The Planning Commission in the past approved this right-of-way and through that process, it created these 2 lots, although the street has not been built. Any action we take today that landlocks those pieces of property, we're taking some serious liabilities. I just wanted to call the attention of the City Commission.
And I have some questions for staff, but we ought to let public comment play out. Yes. So I'll come back to that. Remember what you said, because I have questions.
Again, Jim Fox, 5 Northfield Court. Just because one has a legal right to do something does not make it right to do. That should be plain. Secondly, I'm absolutely shocked that you would come out here and trash the opinions of people that live in that area so that you can build something to make a profit.
This is, I asked, please, let's not address, let's not talk.
Address the commission.
Address the commission.
Address the commission.
Address the commission.
All right. A lot of what we've heard tonight is speculation about how much traffic there really would be. And we're not going to know until it happens. I think the people that have spoken from the neighborhood here tonight have made it very plain. It's a very peaceful, quiet neighborhood. People enjoy walking, cycling. There are kids, there are older adults that use that area for exercise and their enjoyment. And I think having that access is going to change it radically. I'm a bicyclist. I ride through that area. I'm a motorcyclist. I ride through that area. The traffic can be quite challenging, particularly if you're a pedestrian in that area, because there are not a lot of sidewalks. And I would have to go on record as strongly objecting to having that access, particularly when there's plenty of opportunity to get out of that development in other ways.
Before we close public hearing, we're talking about the access. It would be helpful to hear more specific conversation about the access, because there's not a question of one kind of access, no kind of access. You know, what Mr. Penzola outlined was a couple different scenarios where a gate might be involved, and now you've entirely eliminated anybody getting through that doesn't have some sort of clicker or card or what, I don't know what it would end up being. And so when we talk about access and your comments about access, are they about anybody and everybody surrounding this project? Is it about mall traffic that's not resident in this community? Because that's all part of this conversation, and right now it's kind of been an all or nothing comment, and it would be helpful to hear some reaction to the different access scenarios.
I wasn't prepared to answer that.
And I don't expect you, I'm not throwing that at you specifically, so.
No, Commissioners, my name is Lee McVeigh. I had sent you all a letter and been retained by a couple of the residents here. And I had not planned on speaking a whole lot tonight, but I did want to address the issue of the public right-of-way as it connects, because there is a deed out there that connects Mockingbird Lane and goes through. And I think, you know, one of the things that's being said is, hey, this has always been that way. I think implying that the residents should expect that, you know, hey, look, this was going to happen, and so you should expect this was going to happen. The problem with that is that deed was in 2006, and a large majority of the owners in that subdivision purchased their homes prior to 2006. So with no expectation that there would be a connecting street going through that area. On top of that, it would not show up in their chain of title. If I were to buy a house today in that subdivision, unless I went and searched the title to my neighboring lots, I would have no idea, because it's not, you know, as Mr. Cox mentioned, I don't know the paperwork issues there, but it's not a dedicated right-of-way. And so residents, and I think, again, as Commissioner Wise mentioned, the issue is the level of activity, the level of increase in those cars, and obviously the residents wouldn't have expected any, because they wouldn't have known about this street, particularly the residents before this street was dedicated in 2006. And so I guess that plays into asking for more comments about what you're asking for. But I don't think just saying, hey, this has been a street for a while, and so these folks should know this, is a good answer to just, as Mr. Penzola talked about, more than doubling the amount of cars that are going to be on that road. And so that, I would just ask you all to consider that too.
Anyone else? Oh,
Oh, you knew you weren't getting rid of the lawyers that easily.
well, yeah.
I'll try to be brief and specific, which we always say, and then we ask 6 more questions. Okay. I think that in answer to your specific question, Mr. Wise, which I think is a good one because we've had these options discussed, that as an alternative to having all of the mall traffic and all of the AMC traffic, regardless of what percentages we all may think are going to come through or suspect may come through, as it's been said, that's speculative, we know there will be some. And so putting up a gate is a compromise solution that if you have a clicker and you only have however many people have a clicker coming through, that's a better solution, okay? However, I think as I've pointed out and as others have said, let's say you have, we've talked about how many units are going to be 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedrooms, so we can kind of have a vague idea of approximately how many people may live here. You're probably not having a single person renting a 3-bedroom apartment. You're probably not having a family of 4 rent a single bedroom apartment. So you have, a large number of people are probably going to be 300-400 people at least living in these apartments. Hopefully they're all occupied if they're built. So now they're coming out, they all have a clicker, And the issue's been raised, well, what would possibly make them use Sundale Drive when they have other options? I have, and I know you guys have too. When you have potentially a longer route to take somewhere that has less traffic and is going to take you less time to get there, you're very frequently going to take the slightly longer route to avoid the traffic lights, to avoid the congestion, to avoid the difficult pullouts, to avoid all the things that exist on our major arteries. And so North Hills is a straight road. We don't really build those neighborhoods anymore, but they're built then, and it just goes straight through to another, from one road that's going to be accessible to an arterial. I dogleg through my own neighborhood so many times a day, I can't even tell you, just in a way that makes me distance-wise take a longer time to get somewhere because it's still faster to do. And so I think it's a little difficult for us to say that, or anyone to say, that they're almost always going to go one way. They're almost always going to go another way. I can't tell you 100% they're almost always going to come through my neighborhood. But coming through a straight shot to another arterial, even if it's just 400 people once a day, that's still a pretty dramatic increase. And I know statistically it's not. But when you look at a road that has 1,600 on it, and most of the other roads in this neighborhood have a lot less, and North Hills has less, and I don't think we've studied that. My road has less, has almost none, but it's a dogleg, and you can still get to North Hills and Knob Creek from it, and you can from any of these streets where all of these fine folks live. And so I think that's the issue. And we really need to start thinking about that. I would like for us to start thinking about that in human terms, and what that actually means. That even if it's only 400 people, if there are other options, that's how I feel like it would impact us. If I had another 100, 200 cars going by in the evening when I am out walking after work with my kids, or my kids are riding their bikes and people are trying to get to school, and there's another 400 people trying to do the same thing, especially now that the pedestrian bridge is gone, and so we're going to have people trying to come through a little bit of our neighborhood to utilize that even more for Science Hill, that can create an issue. So that's why, to my mind, we are still concerned, even with the gate issue, of having that small amount of increased traffic sounds statistically insignificant, it sounds unimportant, but it really is important. And that's a pretty big increase on a street that only has 1,600. If you put 400 more, if we're looking at percentages, that's a significant amount more traffic from where we are now. Less than 5,000, of course, thank you, but still significant to us. So thank you for your consideration on that.
Hello, my name is Chad Spada. I live at 700 Holly Hill Road, fairly new to the area. I'd like to address Mr. Wise's direct question on what was presented, particularly in the gate. For me, I'd like if that is the option that goes forward, I'd like to better understand what is the accountability, I guess, of the developer to maintain that function, whatever is chosen. Gates can break, gates can be propped open. So I'd like to better understand from the commission, maybe not today, but as we move forward, what is the accountability? What are the course of actions, as you kind of mentioned, the watershed, you went through the lawsuit, so things like that. What's best to go? Thank you.
Two more points, can we get?
Anyone else? I'm going to close the public hearing. Any further discussion?
You're closing.
Yes, sir.
That's why we're hiring an attorney.
Any discussion, comments?
Joe had questions there for staff.
Phil or Mitch, I don't know. Can somebody, if you went with the scenario with the gate and understanding the access to the two lots south of the bottom of this picture, how does that work? Can we get that slide, please? Is that the gate scenario? Or, that's the
That's
break
the
in the
block.
road, yeah. So I think it's the next slide.
There you go.
One more, there we go.
That's it.
So you would have a gate between the first and second interior lane. Is there any kind of interior connection, or would the gate effectively block the two sections? Looks like it blocks it.
The fear of the development in building a roadway around those units here was that then the public could navigate through the development to get around the gate or whatever obstruction. And he didn't want to do that. So having this gate, then the people in this area, if they wanted to go towards Roan, would go through the gate. People on this side, if they wanted to go towards Sundale, would go through the gate.
So to Mr. Spada, Mr. Spada's question, where does the obligation to maintain the gate, and I'm not even directing this at Mr. Cox, 20 years from now, it's owned and operated by, I don't know, you condo it out, and it's a totally different scenario. What right does the municipality, or how do you ensure that the gate is there in 10 years and that it's closed? Just thinking of the gate at Woodstone that's been open for a couple of years now.
I can't answer that legally.
I mean, is there a way because there, I don't know, is Jimbo here?
Probably a question for Mr.
Is there
Epps,
because that's a part of what makes this even work to control the access.
Probably what you would end up with would be it would be a municipal violation. So by state law, it would have to go through municipal court, and the maximum penalty would be a $50 per day fine.
To whom?
To whomever owned the gate.
Which would presumably, in this situation, still be the owner of the complex.
Yes,
If the scheme were ever changed to like a planned unit or condominium, it might be a homeowners association.
Regardless of who owned it, yes, sir.
Wise property
No,
solutions.
no. We don't do gates.
Good. Any more questions?
And to a song's point, if you put the gate there, the way you satisfy the two Walker parcels is that you still have a public right-of-way from Sundale to the gate, and that's what gets you access to those two parcels.
So, Hassan, what was you were getting ready to make a comment about liability for public right-of-way if this is not opened up, then what were your comments?
If we were to make a decision that, let's say we do away with this section of the street, which is from here to there, and you don't have any public right-of-way, this piece of property right here will basically become landlocked. And that will, both this and this will become landlocked. That will tremendously affect the value of the property. From our ordinances, it will not even be buildable. So we would have taken an action that significantly affects that property. And because the city had approved it in the past, which is the Planning Commission, creating the right-of-way, and then we take action today that makes the lot non-conforming, that will put significant liability on the city, legal liability on the city.
You know when that was platted into two parcels?
The plat, I have a plat that shows this being done in this particular lot was platted in 1974. 1974.
I wouldn't have been old enough to be responsible for anything in 74.
And with respect to
Questionable
the
for
gate,
2018.
we have on city streets today, an example is out there on Autumn Ridge, the new subdivision we just did on Bristol Highway, where the developer has these subdivision signs within the public right-of-way. They had to do a plat and put those signs within a private easement, and we have a note on the plat stating that the developer is responsible for maintaining that, and that responsibility transfers kind of automatically to whoever buys that piece of property. So that responsibility will always be on the developer.
That's a gate or just a sign?
The two will work the same way in terms of responsibility.
Good.
Thank you.
So here we are. Here we are staring at the screen. Any comments? Motion?
Yeah, I really commend staff on sorting through things. I commend the period of time that was spent with the developer trying to sort through and particularly decrease the traffic onto Sundale. I understand that the neighborhood's not happy about any increase in traffic. I'd love to tell you that I would support you on that. I think it's a little bit unrealistic to expect that we wouldn't have more than one point that you can get out of a development. When you look to the area to the north coming onto Sunset, I was up there today to look at it again, and it's just really not a possibility, particularly a left turn in that curve. That's ripe for accidents. I do feel that there's a need for more than one egress and ingress point into the development. For that reason, and having had a lot of my concerns allayed regarding the stormwater, even though we don't have a formal, complete plan in front of us, we have enough to where our engineers have been able to look at it, and they've given a lot of assurance to a point that I was going to balk over, that the stormwater will be handled and it will not have an impact upstream or downstream. I'm going to make a proposal to approve the concept plan for rezoning at Mockingbird Lane with the stipulation that the gate option be applied.
Any comments, discussion, or a second?
I've made known my concerns about the gate. And it seems in some respects to be the best way to alleviate the bulk of the pass-through traffic. The reality of it is, if this develops and these become homes, they have every right to access the public right-of-way like any of us do, whether it's in front of your house or my house. And inherent, particularly when you talk about rental communities, is this sort of idea that their transients are less desirable than homeowners. And there's been some comment along that line. And one of the issues that we face is the way people pay for the housing they have is different today. The levels of homeownership of people under 30 don't look like they did when most of us were under 30. And so this seems a reasonable use of this. It buffers your community from the mall. It's certainly preferable to any number of big uses that could have happened in the B4 with far less invitation for public comment. With that said, I would like some clearer sense from staff, particularly Jim Epps, as to how we ensure that gate is maintained, because the day that gate becomes known to be left open, many of the concerns that we've heard here, I think, have a very realistic likelihood. And I do think that alters the nature of... Oh, is he here?
He's here.
Okay.
I feel confident in the answer I gave you.
Okay.
We have no authority beyond sending any violation of something that.
Is there something we
put in
could do
place.
is there a restriction we could put in any approval that would obligate that?
I mean, the most severe penalty that we can issue is a $50 a day fine for violation. State law handcuffs us there for any kind of zoning violation. Jimbo,
I
please
came
correct me
in
if I'm wrong.
and everything was corrected, so I walked back out to my office to do some work.
It's just nice to hear from you.
What he said. I mean, I am here.
Okay.
I'm hiding. I'm doing work, actually. So,
Yes, we can enforce it. We can ensure to the best of our ability that it will be properly maintained and functional. But should someone decide not to abide by our requirements, the best we can do is cite them into municipal court, and we are limited by the state of Tennessee to no more than a $50 per day fine until it is corrected and remedied to the satisfaction of our requirements.
Because a lot of times when gates malfunction, the natural thing to do is leave them open. In this case, if the gate is malfunctioning, I'd prefer to leave it closed. And I guess I'm just trying to figure out if there's some way, and it sounds like there's not much other than $50 a day.
And from a functional perspective of delivering service, we really don't like gates, because they can become problematic for a number of reasons. That's primarily the reason that Phil suggested to begin with a section of roadway being left out to prevent through traffic. That works.
What were your thoughts on that, Mr. Cox?
That just reroutes the traffic right through their neighborhood instead of, so we didn't want that option. We think the other keeps everybody out except our residents. And the residents have a right to use the public street.
Yes, they do.
So, we're fine with it. We don't want the traffic coming through, any more than they want us coming through them. When that movie theater lets out, I don't really want that movie theater coming back that way, through us and through them. I'd prefer that movie theater go out to Rome Street. So I can't speak for what'll happen one day. I won't be here forever, but but as long as we're managing and maintaining this property, we would want it to be functional. There's not anything more unpleasant than to have it not work and your people can't get to their home. Of course, they can drive around. They can always just drive around to the front.
So it would be your commitment to keep it functional?
It would be, yeah. I mean, I don't know what the hammer is, but it would be our desire. It's a good business decision.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, I made a motion.
There's a motion, there's no second.
Mr. Peterson, I have a question. One of the residents mentioned this, that I think when Sundale was repaved, there used to be 5 speed bumps on Sundale and only 3 went back in. Was there a reason for that?
Phil?
Phil's gone already?
No,
Oh,
he's right there.
I'm not sure about the reason. We can always put 5 back. Try to do the minimum required.
Are there other things that could be done on Sundale to slow traffic down, traffic circles or anything like that?
We could.
Where would you have space to do that? Would it be in these intersections that envisioned future stubs, or?
We could do that. What we'd probably look at is like a traffic circle and modify intersections. I think those are the kind of add a beautification to the area.
Like around Town Acres?
Yeah. Yes.
Like a little,
Yes.
Okay.
Tree Streets has them, and it really does slow traffic down.
It's effective in keeping.
You landscape the centers of them.
I can't give you what the speeds are. We can figure that out. We can do speed studies and that sort of thing. We just prefer to see a minimum number, especially on collectors.
So a combination of speed bumps and traffic circles might change the complexion of Sundale.
Right, it would.
Completely riding on it.
Right. Actually, today, speed humps on collectors is prohibited.
What about roundabouts? You can do that? Yep.
So,
Well, why don't we, yeah.
on Sundale, how much of Sundale has sidewalks?
All of it.
So,
AT&T
on one
and
side?
Side, yeah.
Okay.
The neighborhood streets don't have sidewalks, but they're
Interior.
28, 29 feet wide. And because of very low volumes, they feel pretty comfortable in all the pictures I saw of being in the street in low volumes. We don't put them in neighborhoods because it inures to the benefit of the neighborhood. Whereas people where you see sidewalks, they paid for them when they bought their house.
But Sundale, if they're residents with high school or junior high, they can get on the sidewalk on Sundale and walk to school. If they can get across Liberty Bell Boulevard. Okay.
There's a crosswalk there.
Well, it's thought of the commitment to, instead of putting 2 speed bumps back, putting 2 roundabouts. Does that space out?
It'd be a lot nicer, yeah.
And that's really a separate question.
That
from
is,
the
but it's
motion, but
related.
Yeah, it's
related.
right.
We, you know, we're not going to make them all come back to another meeting to make sure we keep our word on that, right? So, okay. I think that'd be a good.
And we have studies that show kind of the effectiveness of roundabouts in terms of speed and flow of traffic. And
Yes.
Well, I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt, they're on our street and they work. Yeah, they work marvelously and they look great. Of course, I didn't get one on my block because fellow across the street didn't want it, so. But they are effective and they're attractive. All right. We gonna sit here and stare at the screen a little longer, or do we have a second, or is there another motion?
this is second reading, so there will be a third reading.
Be a third reading.
And
No, ma'am.
there's not a third reading?
You've got one reading on a concept plan. You've already passed the rezoning
Third reading's on the
ordinance.
zoning.
There will
Rezoning.
be a third reading on the rezoning ordinance. There is not a requirement, but for one approval on the concept plan.
But if between now and the third reading on zoning, if working with staff and engineering and all that kind of stuff, this concept plan could change depending on what you find, in all your assessment. Is that correct? Because you'll be working with the developer on all elements of this.
I just really have reservations about the gate.
Well, what would you propose in its place?
That's what I'm working on.
Do we need to take a recess?
Who made the motion?
Right.
Okay.
All right, I'll second it to bring it to a vote. In the absence of another idea. Ms. Jennings, call the roll, unless there's
All
any
right.
further discussion.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
No.
Mayor Brock.
I guess I still would like to see efforts made to come up with a second point of ingress and egress in the project. That doesn't get us past tonight. I think the gate, although, there may be some things that we have to figure out how to make it fail-proof, would certainly reduce the amount of traffic flow onto Sundale and certainly prevent any cut-through on Sundale. I'm going to vote for this on this reading, but only if we address additional safety measures on Sundale by adding, if the residents want the roundabouts, things that would slow traffic down, and proceed that way. But I'm also, Mr. Cox, going to challenge you to see if you can come up with something else as well. So I'll vote yes.
And those were oddly going to be my remarks as well. I think we can deal with I think we can help with the traffic. I'll commit for as long as I'm here to stay on getting the traffic calming, the roundabouts, making sure that stays top of mind. But again, it's a reasonable use, and I think if we all work together, we can get something that's workable. We all want nothing to happen next to us. It's just nature. It's human nature. I understand that, and you've been heard, and we want to work with you to make something that, not everybody's going to get everything that they want, but I think we can all walk away with something that we feel good about, and then hold us accountable for following up. If there's water, one of my concerns was flooding, and obviously we've tested that here the last few weeks. You can't plan, you will never not have a flooding problem at any particular point in time. When we get some volumes that we got recently, that's just going to happen. So to say there'll never be water there would be disingenuous to say, but we need to minimize it, and I think we can. That's what the engineers are for, and we'll have to count on them to do that. So I will vote yes as well.
Mayor, as a point of order, in order to properly vote on this, Commissioner Brock needs to ask for those who made the motion and the second to accept an amendment to the motion so that the motion would include the additional issues that she raised so that everybody's voting on the same thing. Because you can't make a conditional vote that everybody else isn't voting on, and it be a valid vote.
Restate for me what your conditions are.
That we do traffic calming on Sundale, and that Mr. Cox continue to look for other avenues for ingress and egress out of his project.
Might as well. Do we need to vote it again?
Probably.
Probably, that would be
What
the
the heck?
cleanest,
Yeah.
yes.
Just to be
I'll
sure.
just, Commissioner Van Broeckland? Yes. Okay, Commissioner Wise?
No.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Tamita?
Yes.
Okay. So
And I just want to say, my reservation is about the gate and the private drive, and it's such an important control for the access point into the neighborhood. And so my concern is we cede a lot of control for what amounts to a significant amount of traffic that I think does have the potential of altering the nature of the neighborhood. So that, I have no concern about your organization managing the gate. My concern is 15 or 20 years from now, somebody else managing the gate.
Very good. Mr. Peterson?
Your next order of business is to consider a resolution relating, you want to give them a moment of time to clear the chamber?
Sure. Okay. We'll take a Take a 5-minute recess. careful, thoughtful speed. All right, we're back in session. Mr. Peterson?
Your next order of business is to consider a resolution relating to the sale by the Public Building Authority of Johnson City of the Millennium Center and approving the execution of documents relating therein. As you are probably aware, from the point in time that the Millennium Center, Millennium Park project was contemplated, it has always been envisioned that at some point in time that East Tennessee State University would own and operate that facility going forward. What is before you this evening are two items, the first being this resolution, the second being a purchase and sales agreement also related to this issue that would facilitate the PBA being able to sell the Millennium Center, the parking garage, the digital media lab wing, and to the university, and along with that would go the pedestrian bridge that interconnects the ETSU campus over to the Millennium Center. These discussions actually started back in the late 90s. I can remember discussions between Dr. Stanton and one of my predecessors, John Campbell, about, this is kind of the natural evolution of this project. So this isn't something that's just come out of the blue that we've just begun talking about. The center served a purpose as a meeting and continuing education facility, but it has not continued to perform as hoped when it was built. And I want to emphasize the fact that it is not a conference center, it's a continuing education facility. When the discussion first began about building Millennium Center, it was envisioned to be a conference center, and the MetaView project started coming out of the ground prior to the development of Millennium Center, and that was truly being built on a scale of a full-blown conference center with an adjoining hotel, and a conscious decision was made during the design process that this needed to be a continuing education center built in with the primary tenants envisioned being the VA, ETSU, and Mountain States at that point, as well as local businesses doing continuing ed and training, and trying to draw people from out of town to come and utilize the facility. Over time, the number of out-of-town visitors has declined from what it once was. Looking back at the last 3 or 4 years of usage, I would estimate that probably 80 to 90% of the usage of that facility has been by in-town users, weddings, the Kiwanis Club, ETSU. The real relevance in that is the economic impact of the facility to the local economy. If we've got out-of-town folks coming in, those are truly new dollars to the local economy. But if we have in-town users, there's really not a generation of new dollars. Also, in relation to that, we have a couple of hotels in town that have meeting space that weren't online when the Millennium Center was built. And you've also got one hotel who has a ballroom of similar size to the ballroom at the Millennium Center that's just done a multi-million-dollar renovation. So it's not a total loss of meeting space in our community. There's meeting space still here. That change in business has resulted in an escalating subsidy expense to the city. Since the center opened in September of 1999, the city has funded approximately $8.5 million in an operating subsidy in addition to the debt service requirements to pay for that facility. While the debt service payments will terminate in 2022, the annual operating subsidy is most likely to continue to be in excess of $600,000 per year, which is where it's been the last couple of years. So that's an ongoing expense to the city's general fund. In addition to that, the building's coming up on 20 years, so somewhere in the next 5 to 7 years, we're looking at roof replacement and probably some improvements or replacement of significant mechanical systems in the building. When you put the debt service payment and the annual operating subsidy together, the cost to the city's general fund is $2+ million per year. Again, that debt service piece goes away in 2022, and the amount of that between now and then is going to be somewhere between 1.3, it gets up to about 1.7 for 1 year, and then the last year or two, it kind of tails back off to 1.2, 1.3 per year. So based on that information and the desire of the university to have the ability to own and operate that facility and to have control of the parking garage, we have been in negotiations, we being myself, Dr. Smith with PBA and the university, for at least the last couple of years to some degree or another about the transfer and the sale of the Millennium Center to the university. So what is before you tonight is an opportunity to free up money in our general fund of approximately $2 million a year based on what a penny on the property tax rate generates. That's about the equivalent of an 11-cent increase in your property tax rate that you can avoid by no longer having this ongoing annual expense. If you want to back it out and just look at the debt service payment, it's worth about 3.5 pennies per year in savings to your general fund. Another aspect of this beyond the direct financial impact to the city is recognition of the fact that ETSU is one of the 3 largest employers in the city. It's probably also one of the 3 largest economic engines in our city. And studies have shown, and these are, I feel like, very conservative numbers, that each student enrolled at ETSU is worth $40,000 to the local economy. This additional space, while the university hasn't definitively defined how they're going to use this space yet, will most likely result in new program offerings at the university, expansion of existing programs. I think it opens up the opportunity for enhanced dual enrollment classes, for summer offerings, those types of things. So, for example, if the university having control of this building going forward results in the addition of, let's say, 100 new students, and that's probably a really conservative number, that's worth $4 million positive dollars to the local economy. So it not only helps us financially, it helps the university. And, you know, we spend a lot of resources trying to recruit new business and industry to create new jobs into our area. You've got to remember that most new jobs are created by existing buildings, and this is another way that we can reinvest into an existing business, otherwise known as ETSU, to create jobs and economic activity in our local area. So what is in the resolution that you are now considering with this item would be to approve the resolution, which would give the mayor the authority to sign the documents required to start this process, which include the termination of the lease with the PBA. The PBA owns the Millennium Center and the parking garage and the digital media lab. We have a lease with the PBA, the lease payment being an amount equal to the annual debt service payment. So we would need to terminate that lease with the PBA so that they don't have an obligation to us to continue operations of the Millennium Center. There are restrictive covenants associated with the land and the property around the Millennium Center. There would be the release of those restrictive covenants. They mainly deal with uses and architectural appearance of structures in the Millennium Park. All of the property in the park is now sold and either fully developed or under development, so there's really there's a greatly diminished need for restrictive land covenants in that park. It would include the termination of a state license agreement relating to the pedestrian bridge. We got a federal grant for $250,000, and we had another $400,000 or $500,000 in local money to build the pedestrian bridge. But one end of it ties into the Millennium Center, the other end of it ties into property owned by the state of Tennessee. So we have an agreement with the state of Tennessee allowing both ends of the bridge to land either on state property or state right-of-way. That agreement needs to be terminated because we're going to be transferring the pedestrian bridge to the university as well.
And we don't need to do a conversion, correct?
Correct.
Right. You have to replace another bridge, put another
yes.
bridge up, right?
We have a termination of a university license agreement relating to the pedestrian bridge. What that is, it's currently our bridge, and we have a license agreement with the university that allowed them to put the ETSU signage on that bridge and required them to maintain it and all those types of things. When the bridge becomes their property, there's no longer the need for that license agreement, so that needs to be terminated. We talked about the easements, the termination of a permissive use agreement with ETSU relating to parking spaces on the property. The PBA owns the parking garage, but we have the right to use the parking garage, and as a part of that, we have leased 40 spaces to the university, and they pay us for the use of those 40 spaces, so we will need to terminate that agreement. Since the university will become the owner of the parking garage, we will no longer be leasing them spaces. Termination of the management agreement with PBA for the operation of the Millennium Center. As I mentioned earlier, PBA owns it. We have a lease agreement with them, and we also have a management agreement with them that requires them to operate or see that the Millennium Center is properly operated. That will need to be terminated. And additionally, this resolution also approves the purchase and sale agreement, which is the item behind this one that we'll get into some more detail on here in a moment. This resolution also authorizes the mayor to authorize and execute such documents, including a refunding escrow agreement as may be necessary or appropriate to assist with the defeasance of the bonds outstanding on the property. So when this is sold and everything's approved, the proceeds from the sale will go into an escrow account that will defease the outstanding balance of the bonds until such time that we can pay off the bonds. Beginning in September, we can make early or prepayment of the bonds outstanding for the remaining part of the debt. What we will do would be to look at the market and determine at what point in time is it most advantageous to us to prepay the bonds. Currently, the total of the outstanding debt is $5,500,000. That includes all the expense associated with retiring the debt based on the original life of the bonds. If we prepay bonds at some point in time before their final maturity date, there will be some level of interest savings. We're just not sure what that amount's going to be until we choose a point in time and prepay. That is what's contained in the resolution that we're talking about right now, and I would be glad to answer or provide more detail on anything that you may have questions about.
Just for the benefit of the public, if people are watching, would you just say what the PBA is?
The PBA is the Public Building Authority of the City of Johnson City. They were created shortly before or simultaneous to the construction of Millennium Park. Millennium Park started out with the parking garage, the Millennium Center, and separate from, but simultaneous to, we caused the pedestrian bridge to be constructed. Subsequent projects involve the Carnegie Hotel and all the other development that has occurred around the Millennium Center.
Mom, did you get that?
So I forgot who it was, but someone earlier said, since I was old and could remember
That
a
was
lot
me.
of things.
Sorry.
No, that was no offense taken. This is one of those projects that has been contemplated that I can remember for, well, 20 years, that someday we would get here, and it almost seems kind of strange that we have reached this point that, something that was contemplated 20-plus years ago is coming to fruition finally.
Do we envision, as the university assumes ownership and control of it, that there would be any continued public use of it outside of the university's use?
That is not a requirement of the sale and transfer of the structure as it is now contemplated. Now, as several or all of us have had multiple conversations with Dr. Nolan, who has been very open and assured us that the university is open, and it is his desire to continue that the university be open and cooperative in working with us and the general public. And Dr. Nolan and the university have demonstrated repeatedly that they are more than willing to work with us and with the public to host and coordinate events on campus when they can. And the Science Hill graduation, the Musket Bowl, the county high school graduations are probably really good examples of the openness that the university extends to the general public. Like I say, they haven't definitively committed to the long-term use of it, but it is my understanding that it will probably take multiple months to make any kind of transition, if and when they do make a transition, and that they are more than willing to work with folks the best they can to host some events.
One of the things we're gaining is a 1,200 seat auditorium in the Fine and Performing Arts Center, of which we have 20 days dedicated to the city. So we could actually host an event here that we couldn't now. And so that really opens up some opportunity for different kinds of conferences that could have that style seating.
Yes, ma'am.
We need a motion to approve the resolution.
Yes, sir.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Temita?
Yes.
The next item for your consideration is consideration of the purchase and sales agreement of the Millennium Center and Garage to the state of Tennessee. I've talked through a lot of the specifics to this point, the things I would add that are relevant to the purchase agreement. The purchase price is $5,824,584. It is to be bought as is, where is. There are several things that still have to be accomplished prior to the actual sale and the closing of the transaction. The state has asked that all of the existing contracts be identified, terminated, And that's going to involve things such as the elevator maintenance contract, the fire extinguisher inspection contract, the pest control contract. I mean, there's a lot of minutia in this thing that's going to take some time to wind down. The other thing that needs to be done is the PBA is under contract with Sodexo for the operation of the center. The existing contract with Sodexo calls for a 90-day notice before that contract can be terminated. So we have a meeting planned for tomorrow with Sodexo and the university to determine how all the unwinding of the particulars of this will have to take place. The state and the university have expressed a very strong desire to have this transaction closed by August 31st. So we have been working very diligently to try to accommodate that. But I think the outcome of our meeting tomorrow will determine if that is going to be able to be accomplished or not. The purchase agreement before you this evening contains a closing date of August 31st, but the resolution you just passed recognizes that there may be things such as the closing date that need to be adjusted, and it authorizes the mayor and the city's attorneys to review those adjustments and gives him the authority to go ahead and sign it if there are some of those minor adjustments need to be put into place. It's a pretty straightforward sales and closing agreement. Our bond counsel, Mr. Mamontoff, down at Bass, Berry and Sims, has been the city's and the PBA's representative in this. He has been very closely involved since the inception of the park. He understands all the agreements and the financial and legal obligations, so we have engaged him to unwind this. Mark, I believe, was actually the one that put this agreement together. He and the state's lawyers have been working closely for the last 10 days or so to try to come at something that is going to work and accomplish everything we need to. We would recommend your approval of the purchase and sales agreement that is before you.
You may have said this and I missed it, but any existing conference or anything that's booked for the next little while will be honored, or?
The agreement with Sodexo, and Dr. Smith, correct me if I get off base here, requires that anything that's booked within that 90-day notification period has to be honored. In particular, we've looked at everything on the books through next June. There are, is it 4 or 6 events there are 6 events booked that are not ETSU-related events. The rest of everything else on the books is an ETSU-related event. The university can choose to accommodate those however they need be. Again, I can't bind the university, but Dr. Nolan has expressed they will find a way to accommodate those 6 events so that nobody gets left out. And Sodexo, in a conversation with them today, they are committed to making sure that this is a successful termination of their contract and that obligations are fulfilled. They still have a presence in Johnson City, not the least of which is they run campus food service. They feel like they have an obligation to maintain their reputation and the PBA's reputation. And speaking of Sodexo, they have been a good business partner. They've done I think, an excellent job of running the center, and this in no way reflects negatively on the relationship with Sodexo or their performance or anything like this. This is strictly an opportunity to improve our financial position and give you some revenues to make other reinvestments into our community to help grow the local economy and provide services to our citizens and help the university grow their enrollment and educational opportunities to help us end up with a better educated workforce.
Does Dr. Smith want to say anything?
Dr. Smith? Now that I've babbled this long, would you like to add relevant points?
You brought a PowerPoint, right?
Remembering that the
You've been here
sale
so
has been
long, you
made.
deserve to talk.
Given the extensive comments that you've already heard from other people about other things, I think that I'll pass.
Okay.
I think that Pete's done an excellent job of outlining what's happening.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Any
Move
questions?
approval.
Dr. Smith, we appreciate your involvement in this as well. I know it's been a very intensive couple of months in trying to sort through all these things.
Thank you.
Move approval.
We have a motion. We have a second. Any further discussion? Ms. Jennings, call the roll, please.
Commissioner Van Brocklin?
Yes.
Commissioner Wise?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Brock?
Yes.
Mayor Temita?
Yes.
One last comment on this. The PBA still has a meeting tomorrow that there are several actions that they will have to approve. From there, it will go to the state. There are several agencies in Nashville that will have to take action, which are currently scheduled to happen next Monday. So this is the first step of multiple steps before this is completed, but
And closing in 15 days. I can't even close on a house in 15 days.
You're just using the
We're,
round mortgage
we're,
lender. Yeah.
best case scenario, as far as short timeline, it'll be August 31st. Probably worst case scenario would be 91 days from tomorrow, because we're going to give, I think, if the PBA approves it, Sodexo will receive notice tomorrow or Monday. So it would be 91 days from then, contract's over.
How about you going to the media to lay all this out, or?
We have plans to sit down with the media tomorrow afternoon to try to answer any questions that don't get asked sometime tomorrow during the morning. And I know several of the media outlets, JHL being one, did some interviews earlier today with some folks at ETSU. So yes, we will definitely be available for any type of additional information that's needed.
Very good.
Thanks for all your hard work on this. This is.
It's, I've told a couple of you, there's 3 or 4 projects that I've been working on, seems like for 2 or 3 years. And I think it's going to be like delivering triplets. It seems like they're all going to deliver here within
Well,
2 or 3 weeks.
That's why we threw that Kefauver conversion back into the mix, just so you wouldn't run out of things to do.
Thank you.
We were worried. You get bored.
It's a pleasure. We're glad to be able to do it. And that's the end of your agenda, and I'd be glad to answer any questions, take any direction that you may have.
Questions for the city manager? Any comments? Commissioner Fowler, if you're still watching.
And we know you are.
And we know you're either that or sound asleep right now, because we bored you to death. Keep him in your prayers. He had a knee replacement and he's recuperating at home. He should be back in full force at our first meeting in September. So.
And he has new empathy for his patients.
Yes.
Not that he was lacking of any.
PT is going well.
Yeah, they're working him hard.
Good.
But yeah, so keep him in your prayers. Anything else?
Science Hill's first game tomorrow, Elizabeth.
You know, I forgot all about that, because it's like it cannot be football season yet, but
It is.
It is.
Yeah, one other big thing along hosting visitors, this is race weekend, and there are thousands of people visiting Johnson City, Washington County, Northeast Tennessee region, and we certainly want to welcome all of them, and please offer some extraordinary hospitality to our guests and make them feel welcome, and we certainly appreciate them visiting the area.
And drive politely. This is,
Yes.
yeah, we want people to come back.
Pants are talking around.
Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you in September.